Chapter 9. The factors which stimulate the subconscious will to action. We have spoken of individuals projecting spontaneously and have stated that a certain type, the nervous type, often does so, but this is not because of their adaptable temperament alone. The subconscious will must first decide to move the body, for otherwise even the subject of nervous temperament will not project. Recall the fundamental law of astral projection. When the subconscious will becomes possessed of the idea to move the body, coinciding bodies, and the physical body is incapacitated, the subconscious will moves the astral body out of the physical. Of course, it is no trick to cause the subconscious will to move the coinciding bodies when we are fully conscious and are capable of moving. We do this every day. All we need to do is to suggest to ourselves that we walk, and the subconscious will keep us walking until it receives further instructions. The subconscious will, therefore, is not so mysterious after all. We are using it every day. How can the subconscious will be induced to move the astral body when we are asleep? That is the important question, and I will show presently how it's done. But first, let us do a little reasoning. If the factors which stimulate the subconscious will to action unintentionally can be discovered, cannot these same factors be put to work intentionally and produce the same effect? Of course they can. M. Flammarion once said there are two methods of investigation in all scientific problems, that of observation and that of experiment, and that is exactly how the present writer acquired his knowledge of astral projection, by careful observation, analysis, and experiment. During conscious unintentional projections, I have been enabled to determine those factors which arouse the subconscious will. First, I shall enumerate these factors, next explain them, and then show how to put them into use for the purpose of producing projection of the astral body. A. Dreams. 1. Aviation type. 2. Dreams which arouse desire and habit. B. Desire to possess or do something, not a necessity. 1. Intense desire. 2. Suppressed desire. C. Bodily desires, necessities. 1. Hunger. 2. Thirst. 3. Enervation, lack of cosmic energy. D. Habit. 1. Long-standing habit. 2. Routine. 3. Desirable habit. 4. Broken habit. Some of the factors listed are not as strong as others, as you will learn soon. We have already discussed the first group, dreams, have seen how the subconscious will is activated by them, and have also learned how to use quote-unquote dreams to promote projection. Next, we shall discuss groups B, C, D. The subconscious will does not constitute the entire realm of the subconscious mind. The latter is so vast that it can work within itself, so to speak. The subconscious mind can quote-unquote suggest some action to the subconscious will, as it does during sleep. If one of the factors which I have listed happens to come to the surface, or is strong enough to remain at the surface of the subconscious mind during sleep, that is, the suggestion to the subconscious will to move the body when we are asleep comes from the subconscious mind, just as the suggestion to move the body when we are awake comes from the conscious mind. It is the same will that moves the body regardless of the source of mind from which it takes the suggestion. The only reason why the astral moves out of the physical in the former case while we sleep, and not in the latter case while we're awake, is simply because the physical counterpart is incapacitated in the former state. So far as the suggestion is concerned, the subconscious will responds as readily to subconscious suggestion as it does to conscious suggestion. We can readily see that the prime requisite is to impress one of these quote-unquote activating factors so strongly upon the subconscious mind that mind will retain the impression during sleep. This can be done by way of the conscious mind by repeated action as in routine, or suggestion as in desire, or in some cases by combining both action and suggestion. When we impress one of these activating factors upon the subconscious mind, there often occurs an unintentional projection while the subject sleeps. Here is the explanation. Perhaps you have formed the habit of going to a certain place. You persist in this habit, and in doing so, you impress it upon the subconscious mind. Now, if this impression becomes strong enough and comes to the surface during sleep, the subconscious mind suggests that you repeat the action, and the subconscious will is imbued with the suggestion. Other factors being favorable, temperament, inactivity of the physical body, etc., projection of the astral body will result. Students have said that there is spontaneous projection of the astral body, yet there is always some underlying cause. The reason it is called spontaneous is merely because these causes intervened and conditions favorable to projection were brought about unknowingly. Ordinary habit and ordinary desire, although they will sometimes bring about projection in the proper temperament, will as a rule not impress the subconscious mind so strongly. Intense desire and long-standing habit, as you can see, will make a stronger impression upon the subconscious mind and are therefore more positive. In fact, long-standing habit and intense desire root themselves in the subconscious mind. Suppressed desire and broken habit act similarly. After a habit has been deeply rooted in the subconscious mind, that mind learns to express the habit. That is why it is a habit. It seems to have a desire to express the habit, a determination to express it. That is why habits are so difficult to break, because they are expressed by the subconscious mind in which they are rooted. Now, if you have a deep-rooted habit and suddenly break it, the stress of expression becomes intensified in the subconscious mind. You can feel this stress within you. So while you sleep, the stress, the desire for expression of the habit, the determination to express it, which has accumulated in the subconscious, breaks loose, and the subconscious will endeavors to move the body in order to perform the habitual act. Suppressed desire works similarly. You have a deep-rooted desire, and unless you can appease that desire, you must hold yourself back by conscious effort. Yet within yourself, you keep on desiring. You would satisfy that desire in a moment if it were not for some obstacle. So, by desiring and preventing yourself from appeasing that desire, you increase the stress within the subconscious mind. You can feel the urge of expression boiling within you. You are at war with yourself, so to speak. The stress of expression becomes so great within the subconscious mind that it bursts forth when you sleep and can consciously prevent it no more. Thus, the subconscious will is impelled into action. Hence, the breaking of a long-standing habit or the suppressing of a desire will act similarly and are stronger factors than mere habit or desire. The whole secret of causing the subconscious mind to suggest to the subconscious will is the stress of expression which can be accumulated in the subconscious mind. Some occult experimenters believe that it is the subconscious will which is strengthened, that it is the subconscious will which suddenly bursts forth. This is not true. The subconscious will is super powerful at all times. It is the stress of expression which is strengthened and bursts forth. It is not the subconscious will itself. Remember, the subconscious mind and the subconscious will are two different things. You could not strengthen the subconscious will so that it would burst forth by night. What you do is strengthen the impression in the subconscious mind, the stress of expression, and this merely acts as a suggestion to the subconscious will, which carries out the suggestion. You make the impression, habit, routine, desire, etc. so strongly established in the subconscious mind that it comes to the surface or remains on the surface after you go to sleep, and thus acts as a suggestion, which it really is, to the subconscious will. Suppressed desire, broken habit, and routine are the three outstanding factors that stress the subconscious mind and cause an intentional projection, provided, of course, other factors are favorable. Routine in any regular course of action adhered to day after day, work, pleasure, etc. If you could watch an unconscious projector during the course of the projection, you would often see that the phantom was following the routine which the subject was accustomed to follow during the day. The subconscious mind has the action so deeply rooted in it that the phantom begins to follow its habitual course. Routine and habit are more or less intermixed, and there is another reason why the person who is bedridden by sickness will often project. Everyone follows some routine, and the action becomes, through repetition, deeply rooted in the subconscious mind. Whether you're aware of it or not, there is always a stress there in the subconscious mind, and this is one of the strongest stresses we possess. We have all heard of people who just must work because they say that they get irritable if they stop or retire. That is because the stress of the routine is there. So long as you continue the daily action, you work off the stress and therefore do not notice it. But if suddenly you break the routine, you will feel the urge within you. Farmers especially seem to have this stress of routine strongly rooted in their subconscious minds. They will stop farming, try to live in town, and it will not be long before they are back on the farm again. They must work off that urge. Now, when a person is suddenly compelled to break his routine, perhaps through sickness, the quote-unquote stress in the subconscious mind will begin to accumulate because it's not worked off, just as gas accumulates in the bottle, and if it were not uncorked at times and allowed to escape, would finally blow up of its own accord. This stress would become so strong that it would remain on the surface of the subconscious or come to the surface of the subconscious while the patient slept, and the subconscious will would be brought under its sway and attempt to move the astral body out of the physical and perform the routine action in question. Now it may seem a little strange that if we adhere tenaciously to a routine, it will strengthen the stress of it, and to break the routine will also strengthen the stress of it. But a little reflection will show you that this is true. And incidentally, this agrees in part with the findings of Dr. Charles Lancelin, a French scientist of note, who uses tenacious routine to develop astral projection. I will give the substance of what Lancelin has to say along this line. At the same time, I beg to disagree with Dr. Lancelin when he states that the success of the experiment depends upon the power which the subconscious will possesses. For I maintain that it is the power of the stress of expression in the subconscious mind which suggests to the subconscious will that one must develop the stress and not the subconscious will itself. However, we both agree that tenacious routine brings about the result. The first thing to do to ensure the success of our astral projection, according to Lancelin, is to dynamize the will, to hyperdynamize it, in fact, so that it is overcharged and capable of bursting forth like champagne when the cork is removed. There are various methods of doing this. One of the simplest is to repeat to oneself many times just before dropping off to sleep, I have will, I have energy. This must be kept up until sleep intervenes and the memory is lost. Then one may think of the next day's work clearly, in detail, and make up one's mind not to deviate therefrom, even under great pressure and temptation. This will give the subconscious will a force that nothing else can equal. The subconscious will, thus strengthened, etc. We can see from what Dr. Lancelin has to say that tenacious routine has been found by him to be a promotive factor, just as I maintain that it is. even though we disagree as to the reason why tenacious routine is really an aid to projection. Naturally, I believe Dr. Lancelin is mistaken in his belief that the subconscious will is strengthened. If we examine the matter carefully, we shall find that it's the impression made by the routine which is strengthened. It is the rooting of the habit which becomes so strong that it bursts forth, thus suggesting to the subconscious will to perform the action. Imagine the subconscious will as a locomotive and the stress as the engineer. Now, in order to get the locomotive to move, the engineer must cause it to move. The locomotive will not move of its own accord. Any of the factors which I have listed when coming to the surface during sleep will suggest action to the subconscious will. The subconscious will must obey this action. If it were true that it was dynamized so powerfully that it could not hold itself back, the subject would surely be in a predicament during his waking hours, for his suggestions would then amount to naught. Remember this, it is the suggestion which bursts forth, not the subconscious will. And the suggestion may come from either the conscious or the subconscious mind. If the subconscious will could operate without first receiving a suggestion, how would the astral projector ever be able to control his movements? In fact, how could we control our actions when conscious? The fact that the subconscious will moves the body does not in any sense denote that it is so because it's hyper-dynamized. It is no more necessary to dynamize the subconscious will so that it will move the astral body than it is to dynamize the subconscious will so that it will move the physical body. It is quote-unquote suggestion which does it, not accumulated dynamic energy. When we are conscious and wish to move, we do not stop to dynamize the will. All we need to do is to suggest such movement to ourselves, and we move along under subconscious will. And that is what happens when the subconscious will decides to move the body while we sleep. It merely takes a suggestion from the subconscious mind. It is the suggestion which suddenly comes forth, and the reason we use tenacious routine is to impress that suggestion so that it will come forth by night. If the subconscious will had to be hyper-dynamized before it could move the astral body, then how could that will ever move the physical body? The astral body has been calculated by some scientists to weigh approximately 2 ounces. Suppose the physical body of a subject to weigh 160 pounds. The physical would weigh 1,280 times as much as the astral body, yet we can move the physical body by a mere suggestion, and it is merely suggestion which causes the subconscious will to move the astral body while we sleep too, even though it emanates from a dream. If there is anything which needs to be strengthened, it is the conscious will, so that we shall stick steadfastly to our routine and force its impression upon the subconscious mind. Yet even conscious willpower is not necessary, for we can cause the astral body to move out by an appropriate dream. Everything we do is impressed upon the subconscious mind, and these impressions are constantly suggesting themselves, or at least we can recall these impressions unless we are victims of amnesia. Now, when an act or thought is repeated and repeated, naturally it's more strongly impressed upon the subconscious mind, and naturally it will suggest itself more easily. When we use our conscious willpower and hold tenaciously to a routine, or when we desire the routine so much that we hold fast to it, we impress it so strongly upon the subconscious mind that it stays there on the surface or comes to the surface when we sleep, suggests itself. And the subconscious will is impelled to move the body. That is the main factor involved, the suggestion being realized in action. The subconscious will obeys suggestion, not unlike the hypnotized subject who obeys the suggestions of the operator. How I discover that desire is an activating factor. Now let us examine desires which are necessities, bodily necessities. I will tell first how I came to stumble upon the fact that desire suggests directly to the subconscious will while we sleep. One warm summer night I retired, and as I lay in bed I noticed that I was becoming thirsty. I desired a drink of water, but instead of getting up and appeasing the desire, I did not stir from the bed, to be truthful, merely because I was too lazy. Perhaps I should say drowsy. So the desire was suppressed instead of being appeased. Several times I was on the verge of rising and going for a drink, but I did not do so. Eventually I was lost in sleep. When I regained consciousness, I was in the projected astral body. It was the result of a dream, a very insignificant dream. I was dreaming that I stood beside the water tap above the sink in the kitchen and that I could not turn it on so that I could get a drink. I became clearly conscious there, and my hands, astral, were on the faucet, but unable to turn it, of course. Footnote. To my mind, this is one of the many strong indications that an astral projection cannot be a mere dream, for in a dream it would be the easiest thing in the world for the dreamer to turn the tap and obtain the longed-for drink. Yet Mr. Mульdon has again and again emphasized the impossibility of doing so while projected. He could never affect matter as he easily could in a dream. H.C. End of footnote. There was this difference between the dream and what actually took place. In the dream, I thought that the faucet was shut off so tightly that I could not turn it, but in clear consciousness I knew it was because my hands would not make direct contact with the material. The thought dawned upon me then and there that desire had played some part in the projection, so I experimented along this line and found that it was so. One must not conclude that a suppressed desire is no longer a desire, for the suppression is merely by the conscious mind, and the real desire is present in the subconscious. A suppressed desire is really an intensified desire in the subconscious mind, and it thus comes to the surface and acts as a suggestion while we sleep. In the case of ordinary desire, we might continue for many days, even months, before the impression of it would be strong enough to assert itself while we slept. But in the case of a desire which is a necessity, such as thirst, even the course of an hour will greatly impress the desire upon the subconscious mind. You know this without my statements. If you do not, the next time you get thirsty, try to suppress the desire and notice how the desire within you accumulates until eventually you can endure it no longer. You will notice how forcefully the desire to drink asserts itself. That is just what it does during sleep, suggesting very strongly that you desire water, and the subconscious will be impelled to move the body, for you cannot suppress it now that you are no longer conscious. So if your physical body be incapacitated in a condition where it will not instantly respond the moment the subconscious will is exercised, the astral body will be moved out of the physical. Thirst is the strongest and most quickly produced quote-unquote stress, which can be used in developing the face. Next to thirst comes hunger, desire for food. Fasting exerts a double positive influence upon astral projection. You will recall the first reason. We discussed it in Speaking of Energy and learned that during a fast, a secondary source of energy is cut off, and that consequently the astral during sleep is thrown further out of coincidence to quote-unquote recharge with cosmic energy the more easily. The second reason why the lack of food is a positive factor in the projection of the astral body is that a desire for food is usually present, especially at the beginning of a fast. And this desire, being suppressed by the conscious mind, is intensified in the subconscious mind. And the stress growing so intense that it comes to the surface and suggests itself while the subject is asleep. The subconscious will is dominated by the suggestion, just as it is in the case of thirst. So one can readily see the advantage of fasting while trying to promote astral projection. I shall give some specific directions later for instigating the different quote-unquote stresses intentionally. The action of the unconscious phantom is governed by the stress. If the suggestion of routine come to the surface of the subconscious mind while we sleep and we project in the astral body, unless we become conscious and direct our movements, the phantom will go through the movements of the routine. If the suggestion of any deep-rooted habit comes to the surface of the subconscious mind while we sleep and we project in the astral body, unless we become conscious and direct our movements, the phantom will enact the habit. If a dream suggestion of moving upward through the air comes to the surface of the subconscious mind while we sleep, and we are not conscious enough to direct our movements, the phantom will act out the dream. If the suggestion of an intense desire comes to the surface of the subconscious mind while we sleep and we project in the astral body but do not become conscious and direct the movement, the phantom will try to appease the desire. The phantom obeys the dominating impression which it receives from the mind, either mind when it is projected. Although I have enumerated the factors which impressed upon the subconscious mind and coming to the surface during sleep suggest themselves to the subconscious will, not every factor will act in the same manner, and as we shall see, all three groups are more or less related: dreams, habits, and desires. For instance, we may have a habit of doing a certain thing, we may also desire to do it, and we may also dream of doing it. The golf bug probably realizes the truth of this. A dream can cause a habit can cause a dream, a desire can cause a habit can cause a desire can cause a dream can cause a desire, etc. The suggestion which you want to quote-unquote burst forth as you sleep must be one which involves movement of body, of self, whether it comes from habit, desire, or dream, or a combination of any or all these factors. If the habit which bursts forth is one in which you have a movement of self, the suggestion will be to that effect. If the desire which bursts forth is one which requires movement of self in order to appease that desire, the suggestion will be to that effect. It requires very little reflection to demonstrate that the most powerful suggestion which could burst forth would be from an impression caused by more than one factor being involved in making the impression. The shade of the impression determines the way in which the subconscious will acts. It might respond with determination, half-heartedly, actively, weakly, etc., depending upon the shade of the suggestion which dominated it, and the extent of incapacity of the physical, and the extent of energy in the condenser, etc. Again, think of the subconscious will as a locomotive and the suggestion as the engineer. The engine obeys the manipulations of the engineer, and the subconscious will obeys any suggestion from the subconscious mind in a similar manner. The phantom, while projected, may be conscious, partially conscious, or unconscious. If the phantom is unconsciously projected, it will go through the habitual act or try to appease the desire, whatever it may be, and the subject will not know it. If complete consciousness comes to the projected phantom, the phantom will usually respond to the conscious suggestion which it receives. If, however, a partially conscious projection results, the phantom will perform the action according to the suggestion it receives, and the subject will dream a dream more or less similar to the action. The suggestion of either hunger or thirst, if active during sleep, not only impels the subconscious will to go forth and appease the desire, but very often starts the phantom dreaming. Thus, a double positive force is exerted, desire and dream. The way in which hunger and thirst come to the surface of the mind while we sleep was observed even by the ancient Hebrews. They also noticed that in the dream the desire was appeased. Thus we read in Isaiah 24:8, "It shall even be as when a hungry man dreameth, and behold he eateth, but he awaketh, and his soul is empty, or as when a thirsty man dreameth, and behold he drinketh, but he awaketh, and behold he is faint." The starving Baron Trenck, who was imprisoned in a dungeon, had many dreams in which he enjoyed luxuriant feasts. Now do not think for 1 minute that every time you dream, the astral body projects, or that every time you project, the astral body dreams. A strong desire may come to the surface of the subconscious mind and cause a non-projecting dream. For although the desire to move out is in the subconscious will, other factors may not be favorable, yet the conscious mind must be partially functioning, or you would not have the dream. On the other hand, a strong desire might come to the surface during sleep, project the phantom, and the subject might not dream of it. Strong desires and habits come to the surface of the subconscious mind every night, but the conscious mind is not functioning even partially, so no dream results, yet a projection might result, and this very often happens. In other words, during an unconscious projection, the phantom is actually sleeping, yet strange as it may seem, the phantom can be walking about, standing still, or lying in the air. You will recall that this state was mentioned before as emotive projection and astral somnambulism. Sexual desire is a negative factor. Footnote: we are here considering only the copulative desire. Affection will be discussed later. SM. End of footnote. Knowing how sexual desire becomes active during sleep, it might be thought that this would be a strong activating factor and that it would assist the body to project. Yet, this is a stress which works against itself so far as projection of the astral body is concerned. For such an intense desire would become emotional, the blood in the physical body would begin to circulate more rapidly, and incapacity of the physical body would not be present. Consequently, the astral body would not project. In fact, it would be drawn more closely into the physical body instead of moving outwards from the zone of quietude. The subject would be physically restless. The subconscious mind does not conceive of appeasing such a desire otherwise than in the physical body, for it has been accustomed to this, and to the body being at such times in a reclining position. So suggestion, in this case when coming to the surface of the subconscious mind by night, would pull the astral body into rather than away from the physical body. Phantom projects more easily to a familiar place. Another powerful broken habit factor, which has a very strong activating effect upon the subconscious will, is that of sleeping in a strange place, that is, in a place where one is not in the habit of sleeping. You probably have no idea how inclined the subconscious mind is to move the body back to the place where it is accustomed to lie while sleeping. Projecting from an unfamiliar to a familiar place. When I was about 16, I went one day to visit my aunt, who lived in a neighboring village 14 miles away. That night I slept there, and before going to sleep, seemed very restless, wishing that I were at home, sleeping in the room and bed where I was in the habit of sleeping. I finally dozed off to sleep, and shortly I was dreaming that I was flying about with wings in the air of my room at home, just over the bed where I had always slept. Consciousness came to me in the astral body, and I found myself hovering horizontally over the bed at home where I was in the habit of sleeping. Here is another experience in which I thought I was dead on first awakening. I did not see my physical body lying upon the bed, as I had been accustomed to when projected unconscious in this particular room. The first thought on seeing the absence of the physical body was that I had died and had been unconscious for some time, and that while in that condition the physical body had been buried. Where is my body? I wondered. I want to find it. But scarcely had I thought of finding my physical body than I was back in the room at my aunt's where it was. You can get some idea from this just how slowly the conscious mind functions in comparison with the rapidity of the subconscious. Before I had time to consciously remember that I had been sleeping at my aunt's home, I was back in my physical body. In this instance, you will observe the three factors: habit, desire, and dream were all present. Further, I was wishing to be in a certain place, and in order to appease that desire, the astral body moved to that place. In any projection, the astral body will always project with much more ease to a familiar place than to a strange place. In fact, the astral body, when exteriorized and unconscious, will be found to meander about in the subject's familiar haunts very much of the time, going through activities which have been habitual to the subject. And this applies not alone to temporary projected phantoms, but to permanently disembodied phantoms also, phantoms of the dead. Phantoms of the dead are often dominated by the stress of desire or habit. This is one of the reasons for haunted houses and haunted localities. Phantoms of the dead may have desire and habit so strongly embedded within them that they will continue steadfastly in their habits and conduct even after becoming conscious, simply because the stress is there and they must work it off. It is the same stress of desire or habit or both which the phantom tries to work off when we sleep, and knowing this, we are able to force the subconscious will to move out the phantom while we sleep by instilling a strong stress of desire or habit or both, which will come to the surface of the subconscious mind during the hours of sleep, while our physical body is usually incapacitated, and the phantom will be liberated to work off the stress of habit or appease the desire. Phantoms of the dead for a time after entering the astral plane do not conduct themselves in a manner differing from projected phantoms of the living. Footnote: the astral plane coincides with the physical plane just as the astral body coincides with the physical body, SM. End of footnote. Some remain unconscious for a time, others are conscious even before the astral cable snaps, and others roam about in a dream or partially conscious. While in either the unconscious or partially conscious condition, the phantom is under the stress of habit or desire, and does not deviate from it as long as the suggestion remains active. But once conscious, he can, if he wills to, break off the continual appeasing of desire and the routine of habit. Yet, as a matter of fact, the stress is so strong that the phantom in many instances loiters about its familiar haunts, submitting to the urge of the stress, even while conscious. After death, habits are unbroken, desires are unappeased, and the stress of them remains. The phantom goes through the process of appeasing some desire which he had in the flesh, or the habit to which he had been accustomed. The unconscious phantom sometimes moves material objects. You have been told that the way in which the subconscious will respond to the suggestion depends upon the shade of the suggestion. Under the stress of deep-rooted habit, routine, the subconscious will become, on some occasions, actually determined. It uses powerful motivity in every action, and this motivity, while performing a habit, is much more powerful than at other times. This is the reason why phantoms of the dead, while under the stress of habit in their accustomed haunts, often move objects which their conscious wills could not move. It is the stress of suggestion which is so powerful and deep-rooted in the subconscious mind that it produces a strong subconscious will response. The unconscious phantom, under the stress of working off a habit, can sometimes move things which another conscious phantom cannot move, because the conscious will cannot produce the motivity which the subconscious will can produce, and a single conscious suggestion is not as strong as a deep-rooted subconscious suggestion. Many haunted houses are thus easily accounted for. The phantom whose activities are detected there is under the stress of desire or habit, and the motivity is so strong that detection by earthly beings residing there is brought about, and the haunter may be unconscious, partially conscious, or conscious. Many haunted house investigators have noted that certain manifestations occur at certain times regularly. This is because the phantom is under the stress of habit. Here is an example. A haunter under the stress of a desirable habit. I knew an old lady who lived in a room on the second floor of a house where she spent the last years of her earthly life. She had a habit during the last 10 years of her life of reading the Bible regularly. Every morning between 4 and 5 o'clock she would arise, take a squeaky old rocking chair, which she cherished, and read the Bible while she rocked back and forth, every rock of the chair producing a similar squeak. At 5 o'clock she would close her Bible, then go downstairs. This routine she kept up for 10 years. Finally she passed out of earthly existence. The occupants who lived in the house after the old lady's death were awakened every morning about 4 o'clock and could hear the chair which the old lady had used squeaking as if someone were rocking back and forth in it. The story circulated that the house was haunted, and not only did occupants who lived there immediately after the old lady's death move out, but no one would ever move into the house after that. Although the people who moved out were not superstitious, so they said, and did not believe in spirits, they nevertheless insisted that they had heard the chair squeaking regularly between 4 and 5 o'clock every morning. This is given merely to show how the stress of habit in the subconscious mind will grip the phantom, and further, how strong motivity is under the stress of a desirable habit. The phantom was under the desire to read the Bible and under the habit of reading it regularly at a certain place. An early morning haunter. Footnote: I am well acquainted with every person mentioned in this account, S.M. End of footnote. Here is another case which illustrates how the phantom turns to its regular habits when projected. An old man, 75, lived with his son and his son's family. All slept on the upper floor of the house, the old man having a room of his own, the husband and wife a room of their own, and 2 children likewise. The old gentleman was in the habit of rising early in the morning and lighting the stuff downstairs. He did this regularly at 6:30 o'clock, not because he was under any obligation to do so, but because he wanted to do it. One Sunday morning at about this hour, the son awoke upstairs and heard the stove lids rattle on the stove downstairs. He remarked to his wife that his father, the old man, was lighting the fire. Nothing unusual in that, and about half an hour later the son and his wife arose. Going downstairs, they found that the stove had not been lighted. Still, they knew that they had heard the old man, or at least someone, rattling about the stove at 6:30. The wife, going upstairs to the children's room, told them not to make a commotion when getting up, as their grandfather was still asleep in his room. But the children objected to this, saying that they had heard their grandfather go through the hall and downstairs and heard him rattling about the stuff, with the children confirming their former belief that the old man was already up. The son and his wife went to the old man's room. He was lying as if asleep, but examination proved that he was dead. A doctor was immediately summoned and stated that the old man has been dead at least 5 hours. So they concluded that it could not possibly have been he, the old gentleman, whom they had heard and whom the children had heard. Cases similar to this are numerous and on record. The projected phantom was under the stress of habit, and the motivity in such a case is powerful. I shall come back to the subject of how the phantom may move physical objects later. The factor enervation. In the list of factors which incite the subconscious will to move the astral body may be found enervation. There is no need to go into a study of this factor, for we have already learned that enervation, lack of cosmic energy, causes the astral to move further out into the cosmic stream of energy during sleep. We have learned that subjects of nervous temperament move out more quickly, further, and more easily. Enervation is really a bodily condition. It's an aid to projection of the astral body. Now, if you repeat to yourself over and over again, I have energy, I have energy, I have energy, day after day, as some authorities maintain that you should do to promote projection, instead of aiding projection, you are actually binding your astral body tighter to the physical. For the more energy you store up, the less inclined will the astral condenser be to move to a greater distance during separation. If the nervous temperament be the best suited to projection, then is it not inconsistent to say that to build up the energy is the best method of attaining projection? Surely it is. It is lack of nervous energy which makes the nervous temperament, and to build up one's energy by any means is only to draw the subject further away from the end desired. The astral body does not separate from the physical body at night during sleep because it has too much energy, but because it has not enough. That is the reason why we go to sleep. If it were strength of will and accumulation of energy which caused projection of the astral body, the sick person would be unable to project, but this is precisely the opposite of the known facts. Now I have the greatest respect for all of my contemporaries in this field, but I believe that their theories of good health and accumulation of energy are honeycombed with inconsistencies, and I am dogmatic in my subconscious stress theory. Determining the proper stress to use in developing. Now that we understand what it is that impels the subconscious will to move the body while we sleep, all that is necessary to do is to develop one of the factors strongly enough so that it will come to the surface or stay at the surface of the subconscious mind after we go to sleep. In choosing the factor one wishes to use, one should not select the first one he thinks of, but should first of all resort to analysis and see if it be the factor suited to his individual case, one which would not be too difficult to develop in the subconscious mind, one which would be in harmony with the laws of projection, and one which he has already strongly developed instead of creating an entirely new one, etc. Ask yourself questions such as the following: have I a desire which I dream of appeasing frequently, or which grips me forcibly in waking hours? Will it require movement of the astral body in order to appease it? Is it a sex desire? If so, do not use it. It will not permit passivity of the physical body. Is it a desire for revenge directed against someone? If so, do not try to develop it. Have I a habit which I like? Is it a desirable habit? Do I dream of it frequently? This merely shows you that it's strongly rooted in the subconscious mind and suggests itself while you sleep. Is it part of my routine? Do I dislike my routine, etc.? The object of asking oneself questions such as these is merely to enable one to determine which factor would be the best for development, the one which would fit your particular requirements the best. If you have learned the requirements for astral projection, you will be enabled to select the factor more scientifically, so to speak. It is not for me to dictate which factor you select in trying to develop, but my advice would be to try to thirst for several reasons. First, why go to the trouble of developing a habit of tenacious routine, working probably weeks and impressing it strongly on the subconscious mind, when you can impress thirst there in a few hours with little effort? Second, thirst must be appeased. The subconscious knows this and will resort to anything to get the body to water, so it will move the astral out with determination if it cannot move the physical. I shall give the formula later. Incapacity, the fundamental difference between astral projection and physical somnambulism. Before any specific instructions can be let down for you to follow, it is necessary for us to study another aspect of the process. We know that the subconscious will does not only have to become possessed of the idea of moving the body, but that the physical body must be incapacitated. After we learn how to quiet the physical body, we shall come to the instructions for combining both stress and incapacity, which must be done in order to produce the desired effect, projection of the astral body. As you will recall, incapacity of the physical body means that it's unusually passive, inactive, so passive that it will not respond the instant the subconscious will tries to move the coinciding bodies. When this happens, the astral body just breaks away from the physical. If the subconscious will attempts to move the body just as the subject is rising to sleep, the phantom will project without stopping in the zone of quietude. If the subconscious will attempts to move the body, that is, if a suggestion bursts forth while the phantom is in the zone of quietude, and the physical body is not in the proper degree of passivity, the phantom slips back into the physical mechanism and the two coinciding bodies will move. The subject may be partially conscious or unconscious. He may act out what he is dreaming, if partially conscious, may appease a desire, may enact a habit, etc. This is physical somnambulism, and in it the subject may become conscious just as he can in astral somnambulism. The only difference is that the physical body is incapacitated in one case and is left behind, while in the other case the physical body is not incapacitated and moves along also. A study of somnambulism will help us to appreciate the significance of astral projection, for we can see the similarity can see that there is but one factor determining whether it will be the physical body which moves or the astral alone which moves. That factor is incapacity, and there is a specific method of bringing it about at will. Before going into this method, let us first observe the similarity between the cause and continuation of physical somnambulism and the cause and continuation of astral projection. The cause, as has been pointed out, is in both cases the rising to the surface of the subconscious mind of an impression, which acts as a suggestion to the subconscious will, the nature of the impression being a habit, a desire, or a dream. Once the phantom is projected, or once the subject begins to walk in his sleep physically, the condition of the mind is the same. The physical sleepwalker can act out the dream which is in his mind, so can the astral somnambulist. The movement of the somnambulist is so certain that if observed, one would be struck by the controlling intelligence. If the somnambulist encounters a person, he will either pay no attention to him, or at once that person will become a part of the dream if the subject is partially conscious. In the astral body acting under similar conditions, should the projector in a dream encounter other individuals, either earthly or in spirit, they likewise at once become characters in the dream. Recall the dream in which I was shooting Indians. Recall that little priest stood nearby. One writer has stated that he knew of a man who went to bed, wondering if he had locked the door of his shop, and that the man was subsequently stopped by a policeman close to the shop. He was walking thither in a somnambulistic condition. We can see how this impression remained upon the surface of the subconscious mind and activated the subconscious will while the man slept. Had he been physically incapacitated, the astral body alone would have traveled the route to the shop rather than the physical. You may say this is not a case in which the impression is caused either by desire, habit, or dream, but it is. So far as the dreamer's mind was concerned, the habit of locking the shop door was apparently broken. There was also a desire to know whether the shop was unlocked, and if so, to lock it. You will find by analysis that all somnambulisms and all astral projections are caused by the same fundamental factors: desire, habit, or dream of the proper type. Even though by studying the actions of the sleepwalker one can find no clue which leads him to accept this belief, there is somewhere to be found the clue which leads to desire, habit, or the proper dream. Now a strong habit may project the phantom or put the sleepwalker into action, and so may a dream suggestion, even though it leads him away from the fulfillment of the habit. This is what generally happens too. The subject is always dominated by the strongest suggestion in the mind at the moment. As an illustration of this, suppose one should go to bed hungry, and the desire for food should come to the surface or remain on the surface of the subconscious mind. If the desire were strong enough, the suggestion food would be given to the subconscious will. If the subject were not physically incapacitated and did not become conscious, he would begin to somnambulate. If he were physically incapacitated, he would project under the dominant suggestion food. If no dream suggestion occurred, or if a dream occurred with suggested eating, as it would in all probability, the subject would continue under the dominating impression and might go to the cupboard, to a restaurant, to a bakery, etc., depending upon the relative thought which food brought up in the mind. If, on the way to fulfill this desire, he should encounter in a partially conscious condition, that is, in the dream, something which would bring a different impression to his mind, he might forget his desire for food and begin to do something else. Suppose he were projected or physically somnambulating under the suggestion food, and that the relative impression was of the bakery and that he was journeying to the bakery. Now, on the way, suppose he should pass the bank where he transacted business and kept his money, and where he was in the habit of going very often to deposit his earnings. The suggestion might dominate the one he was following, and he would try to enter the bank instead of continuing to the bakery. If he were in the astral body, he would pass right through the door of the bank, go to the teller's window, make his deposit, then walk out again, following the course he usually followed when coming from the bank after making a deposit. If he were in the physical body in a somnambulistic condition, he might go up to the door of the bank, dream that it was closed, turn around and start home again. He would be following the suggestion which he derived from the mind which guides his movements, just as it is suggestion which guides our movements while we are conscious. Walsh writes, in certain persons the sleepwalking attacks very, very little. Every word, gesture, or other act occurs at exactly the same time with each performance, just like a drama on the stage. Should the attack be terminated abruptly, the dream drama will, with the next attack, begin at the point where it was broken off. This point is illustrated by a case of Charcot's. His patient was a newspaper man who, during somnambulistic attacks, believed he was a novelist. After he had written 2 or 3 pages, these were taken away from him and the attack terminated. In the next attack, he would begin to write at the point where he left off. Once again, we see desire to write and habit as active causes. Thus, we see that physical somnambulism and astral projection rest substantially upon the same foundation. The difference consists merely in whether or not the physical body is active enough to cling to the astral during the performance. An astral projection which was caused by a thirst. Just as under the dominating suggestion of hunger, the proper subject may either physically somnambulate or be projected in the astral body and may go to the cupboard, restaurant, or bakery, so will the same type of person go to the water faucet or to a stream or to any place where he can appease the desire if he be under suggestion of thirst. When first experimenting along this line, that is, when first voluntarily inducing the desire for water before going to sleep, I was successful at the very outset in producing projection of the astral body. To strengthen the desire stress, I would prevent myself from drinking for some time before trying the experiment, and at the same time aggravate the desire by thinking of drinking, gazing at a glass of water, putting it almost to my mouth, and then refusing to drink it. Before retiring, I would force myself to swallow about 1/8 of a teaspoon a teaspoonful of salt. This was an ordeal, as you may well imagine, but think of the stress which was put upon the mind by doing this. Imagine the desire for drink, which was accumulating even after sleep intervened. The first projection, by means of this method, in which I became conscious, was a dream projection. I dreamt that I was walking along a dusty road. It was a sweltering hot day. I was thirsty but could not find a place to get drink. I pulled off my shirt and tried to moisten my mouth with the perspiration which it contained. My thirst was increasing. I was becoming weak and blinded by the sun when finally I reached a farmhouse. There was a windmill. I hurried as fast as I could to the tank below it, but it was dry. I looked up at the wheel above me and saw that it was not turning, and knowing that it would pump water if the wheel turned, I began to climb the structure, intending to stand upon the platform at the top and turn the wheel by hand, and thus pump water into the tank, then descend and drink it. I began to climb up the ladder of the windmill. Just as I reached the top, the wheel began to turn rapidly, and catching my clothing, threw me outward through the air. I was glad in the dream that I was flying through the air, for I could see that I was speeding toward a river near my home, and that I should probably get a drink there. Soon I was by the river and on my knees drinking. It was at this moment that I became clearly conscious, and I found myself in the astral body on the bank of the river, which is less than 100 yards from my home, at a spot where I often sit when fishing. You will notice the various elements in this experience which affect projection. There was the desire for water, there was the dream of going upward up the windmill, of moving outward as the wheel caught my clothing, of awakening at a spot near the river where I had been in the habit of fishing. By instilling the stress of thirst, I produced several recurrences of the earlier experience which I have given, in which I woke at the water tap in the kitchen with my hands astral on the faucet. Remember that when you once become conscious in a certain place in the astral, you will probably again become conscious in the place, in the same spot, under similar conditions. A physical somnambulation which was caused by thirst. The following incident was related to me and illustrates how the stress of thirst may cause physical somnambulism as well as astral projection. A man of middle age who had not been in the habit of drinking much water gradually developed an intense desire for drink. By day he would drink immense quantities, and finally he began to get up in his sleep and do so also. He would rise from his bed in the somnambulistic condition, slip on his shoes, go downstairs, put on his hat, take the pail out of the well, fill it, and then come back into the house again and drink. This performance was kept up every night regularly. A physician who was called to observe the case pronounced it a nervous affliction, but his tonic for the nerves did not stop the sleepwalking. Finally, another doctor was appealed to. The second physician came several nights to observe the man's movements and noticed all the details. He concluded that it was the desire for drink which caused the man to somnambulate in this manner, and after examining the man carefully discovered that he was suffering from a bad case of gastritis, which is always accompanied by intense thirst. By curing the gastritis, the man's intense desire for water disappeared, and the nocturnal activities also ceased. If one experiences an intense desire for wrongdoing, a criminal desire which he is forced to suppress, and the desire bursts forth while he sleeps, should he somnambulate physically or project in the astral body, he will attempt to appease that desire. Walsh says, as a rule, the acts of the sleepwalker are harmless and in accord with his experiences or inner nature. Somewhere I have read of a clergyman, a most upright character by day, who by night was a thief. and of another individual who resembled Mr. Hyde, made famous by Stevenson. We may attribute these causes to very powerful dreams or to strong impulses which the individual was able to repress by day. And Dr. Walsh is correct. It is the suggestion which bursts forth while the subject sleeps, and whether the subject projects in the astral body or whether the physical body clings to the astral during the performance depends solely upon one factor: incapacity. How I discovered that incapacity is an important factor. Let me tell of another discovery which I made while in search of the causes which brought about my early projections, and you will learn thereby one of the main reasons for incapacity. Being of an inquisitive nature, after experiencing several conscious projections, I concluded that there was a cause, that the seeming miracle could not possibly happen unless behind it there were certain factors which promoted it, and within myself I was annoyed, since I could not at once find the cause. Several prominent spiritualists to whom I wrote informed me that no one knew any specific causes for astral projection, that it was a gift, that the Hindus were especially gifted with the ability, etc. So after retiring at night, I would wonder if I should go out in that phantomous body. I remained awake for hours, thinking of this strange reality upon which no one could enlighten me. I would drift into the hypnagogic state, visualizing projection, thinking projection. In fact, the experiences which I had encountered seemed to have gripped my every thought after I went to bed at night. And to experience such a reality and yet find no one who would believe me, that was the dismaying part. My associates, yes, even members of my own family, ridiculed the very suggestion of such an impossibility, as they called it. I was pronounced a dreamer and said to be off in the upper story. The scorn which I received from others hurt me. I would cry often after going to bed to think that no one would place any credence in my claims. If I could find the causes, I reasoned, and could make them known, perhaps others would believe in the phenomenon. So within me arose a determination to learn what brought about the projections. You have already been made familiar with some of the findings which I then made. This is how I made the discovery that incapacity of the physical body is essential. One night I lay awake in bed and had been concentrating in a quiet mental mood upon different parts of my body. My mind came to rest upon my heart. I noticed that it did not seem to be beating at the time it should when normal. Next day, I went to the doctor and had the organ examined. It was beating but 42 minutes per minute, but was steady. He gave me a box of strychnine, a cardiac stimulant, assuring me that it would correct the condition. He added, however, that occasionally in his practice he had come upon similar cases, one man whom he named having a pulse which was in the 40s also. Now, for almost a year prior to this, a week seldom passed by that I did not experience a projection in some form, and every night I could notice the astral body rising out of the physical in the hypnagogic state, causing me to quote-unquote jump. I believe I mentioned once before that persons who have been troubled with sinking, sliding, rising and falling sensations and quote-unquote jumps, repercussions of body, are relieved when their physicians give them a remedy to regulate the heart's action. And here is the reason why a heart stimulant will relieve the condition. The heart activates the physical body. If the heart be slow, the body when at rest becomes more passive than when the heartbeat is normal or fast. The astral body always withdraws into the zone of quietude during sleep. When the physical body is normally active, the astral cannot withdraw until it becomes passive. Unconsciousness usually intervenes before the astral body emerges from the physical, and the body becomes passive before the astral rises out of the physical. Now, if the heartbeat be below normal, the physical body becomes passive enough for the astral body to move out of it shortly before consciousness is lost, and the subject notices the astral body's movement. Give the subject a cardiac stimulant, and the physical body will not become inactive enough to allow the astral to rise until long after unconsciousness has intervened. And further, the stimulant holds the astral body very near the physical body. Recall now what was said regarding innervation. When the astral condenser is run down, the astral moves out of coincidence more rapidly than when it is holding a fair amount of energy. That is why the subject who is nervous, lacks nerve energy, experiences symptoms similar to those of the subject whose heartbeat is below normal when entering sleep. A heartbeat below normal has the same effect as innervation. It allows the astral body to move out of coincidence before the subject has lost consciousness. Imagine what would happen if the subject were lacking in neuric energy and possessed a heartbeat which was far below normal at the same time. Well, that is just the condition which I was in. I stated that before taking the cardiac stimulant which I procured from my doctor, I had experienced a projection in some form almost every week, and the primary stages of projection every night. No sooner had I begun to take the heart stimulant than all the trace of the phenomenon disappeared, even the primary stages. I gave this a thorough trial, taking the pellets for 2 months, and became firmly convinced that passivity of the physical body is a necessary requisite for producing the phenomenon of astral projection. I stopped taking the pellets. In a few days I observed that the rate of my pulse was dropping, and it was not long before I was again experiencing the things I had formerly experienced. Then I made another discovery. I could control my pulse rate by means of my mind. After retiring and relaxing, I would concentrate upon my heart, and in less than 2 weeks I could speed up the heartbeat or slow it down at will. It was not long before I succeeded in keeping the heart at its normal rate without the use of the stimulant, but the ability to reduce the pulse rate also enabled me to induce complete incapacity of the physical body at will. I shall later on give you the instructions for doing so, in order that you too may be enabled to induce this necessary condition. Some positive minor factors. But while realizing that the two major factors of astral projection are proper stress of suggestion and physical incapacity, you will, while concentrating upon these essentials, realize that there are numerous minor factors which contribute to the two major ones, and will learn to include every possible promotive element. I shall now enumerate some of these, and you will no doubt be able to think of others. The correct temperature for the experiment is extremely important. If the temperature in which you attempt development be too cool, you will harbor a mental disquietude. If it be too warm, you will likewise be uncomfortable, thereby preventing passivity and relaxation. Further, the warmth of the body will aid the heart in circulating the blood more freely, which tends to prevent incapacity. The ideal temperature is one in which the subject is cool but comfortable. Anything taken into the body which produces a stimulating effect, liquor, medicine, food, will exert a negative force, mostly because the stimulant works against incapacity. Although the emotion should be calm, the mind should not be as is commonly supposed. One can retire when greatly troubled in mind, and that very condition of being may create the proper stress, which stays at the surface or comes to the surface after sleep intervenes. Of course, with hypnosis, when the suggestion comes from the operator instead of from the subject himself, placidity of mind is essential, essential. In the type of projection we are now studying, the mind of the subject himself acts in the same manner as the mind of the operator in hypnosis. In self-projection, the suggestion comes from the subject's own mind. In projection induced by hypnosis, the suggestion comes from the mind of the operator. If in fact the mind were calm, no suggestion would come forth during sleep. Consequently, no projection of the astral body would be brought about. The vital factor in projection is the stress of the mind. The conscious mind can be greatly troubled before the subject goes to sleep, and the stress which is there continues to stay at the surface of the subconscious. Recall the incident of the man who went to bed worrying, thinking that he had left his shop door unlocked. This stress remained on the surface even after he had gone to sleep, possessed his subconscious will, and he arose in his sleep and went to the shop to lock the door. If you have formed the opinion that the mind must be calm in order to produce projection of the astral body, you will be forced to revise this idea, for passivity of mind is a sure way to prevent projection. The sleeping quarters in which the subject sleeps should be far from disturbing noises. Noises have a tendency toward interiorization and physical alertness. There is nothing new in this assertion, for everyone knows that when a sleeper is to be awakened, noise is one of the surest way of arousing him. However, if the phantom has been projected out of the physical body for some distance, outside chord activity range, noise is as apt to awaken him in the astral body as it is to awaken him in the physical body. In attempting development, however, the subject is not apt to make a complete long-distance separation at first, and therefore sounds are undesirable. I have noticed that it is the unusual sound which usually awakens the phantom. The tick of a clock, the drafting of a stove or furnace, sounds which have been familiar and pass unnoticed, do not seem to affect the experiment. Naturally, a country environment is more suitable to the experiment than a city environment insofar as the sound element is concerned. Anything and everything which contributes to the comfort and relaxation of the body, which can be instituted during the attempt at astral body projection, should be put into use. It is advisable to use as little bed covering as possible, for sometimes extra weight upon the body will induce peculiar psychological effects during sleep. The weight resting upon the body may cause the belief during sleep that the subject is under some massive structure or that he is smothering, causing dreams to that effect and not infrequently arousing the emotions. But this is not all that heavy bed clothing is liable to do. Several times, when within chord activity range and conscious, I have noticed that there seemed to be some indescribable weight resting upon me, as if something actually pressed upon me. It was as if my breathing did not satisfy my desire for breath. Again, I have had dreams wherein I seemed to be standing up and trying to walk, while some massive weight rested upon my head. And I have awakened from these dreams and found myself projected and within chord activity range, and still the weight seemed pressing me downward. Observation convinced me that this sensation of being under a great weight while projected and within chord activity range was caused by the weight of the clothes resting upon the physical body. Thus, heavy bed covers are not only apt to induce a dream which will prevent the suggestion for projection, but will actually suggest the idea of going downward under weight to the projected phantom. There is another way of looking at this matter. Might not the heavy bed coverings give the subconscious mind the idea of smothering, or cause a dream of smothering, which would set up the desire for air, causing the subconscious will to move the body out of doors to appease the desire for air? Of course it could. And if the physical counterpart were incapacitated, the phantom would move out. Just another cause of so-called spontaneous projection, which always has some fundamental law behind it. It would not be advisable, however, for anyone to endeavor to produce a projection of this sort at will by trying to smother himself into a desire for air, for in trying it he might take the air permanently. The clothing of the body can bring about results similar to those just mentioned. During the time of the experiment, it is advisable to wear nothing which can be dispensed with. Wearing nothing is better than wearing something. Tight-fitting clothing is most undesirable, for it is not only uncomfortable, but shuts off the blood circulation. While it is desirable to slacken the circulation of the blood, it is unwise to prevent its circulation. The less restrictions of the sort, the better. It is not that the astral body cannot pass through the clothing or bed covers, for it can easily pass through a brick wall or a steel vault, but clothing and other such restrictions produce a psychological effect which is not altogether desirable. With little or no clothing covering the body during the experiment, a psychological effect of freedom and lightness is produced, which is a powerful factor in strengthening the sensations peculiar to projection. One can quite understand how such sensations would counteract the sensations of projection, which are lightness and freedom. The sensation of being held down will hold the phantom down. Likewise, the sensation of lightness will affect the phantom in a similar way, even instigating dreams which have a pulling out effect upon the dream body. So much for the clothing element. It is well to remember that weight upon the body from clothing or anything else is as unfavorable condition for astral projection. Projection of the astral body can take place while the subject is seated in a chair, but lying in the horizontal position is greatly to be preferred. Those hours of the night which one has allotted to sleep will probably be found the most satisfactory. There are many reasons why this would be so. When you retire at night, you put away thoughts of worldly activities until the next day, whereas if you attempt projection during the day, you will say to yourself, "I'll just lie down for a while and see what I can do, then get to my work again," etc. There are so many reasons for practicing the face at night rather than during the daytime that it would seem almost a waste of time to try to enumerate them all, and they should be as self-evident by now. At night, there are not so many influences to distract your attention from what you're concentrating upon, and you will find that you can think of self, which is important, with much more ease at night than during the day. Although projection of the astral body can take place at any time, I have noticed that as a rule it occurs several hours after the subject has been sleeping, and usually after midnight. It is only natural that this should be so, for during sleep the physical body becomes less active. Further, the outside world is more liable to be in a state of quietude after midnight. One of the most certain ways of ensuring the projection of the astral body, and especially a projection which is conscious from the outset, is for the subject to go to sleep several hours, and then begin to project in the astral body just as he is becoming conscious, that is, while he is in the hypnagogic state emerging from sleep. This is the time when astral catalepsy is commonly met with. It is often several seconds before one can move physically when in this condition. First, because the physical body is very passive. Second, because the phantom is cataleptic. And third, because the motivity may be outside the body. This is a favorable time for conscious projection, which of course can be brought about by suggestion. Lying upon the right side or upon the back are the two positions best suited to astral projection, although it can take place regardless of the position of the body. Lying upon the back has always produced the best results for me, and you will probably find that this position is especially favorable if you are trying to produce exteriorization in the hypnagogic state on entering sleep. The sensation of floating and of rising upon the air are more easily produced by lying upon the back. One reason for this is that the blood is prevented from circulating freely along the spine with its many nerves, thus deadening one's feeling of contact with the bed. The sensation, regardless of where it primarily originates, is decidedly what is wanted for producing astral body uprising, provided, of course, you enjoy the sensation. You will notice too that while lying upon the back, it is easier to note the sensation which is produced when the astral body moves into the zone of quietude. Many people cannot go to sleep while lying upon their backs for this very reason, because they have the sensation of floating just as they are about to lose consciousness and have slight repercussions. Many people, when undergoing this, will ejaculate a more or less distinct word or syllable concurrently with the repercussion, and will have a breathtaking feeling in the pit of the stomach. Terrifying as the experience may seem to the subject at the time, it is usually amusing to him afterward when he thinks it over. Others become so terrified that they will jump out of bed before they can stop themselves. There is on record the case of a woman who experienced the astral body's movement as she was rising to sleep, and repercussed with a shriek. She jumped out of bed and ran outside before the terror left her. Coincidentally, with the repercussion, she would always shriek. She stated that as she was going to sleep, something would get under her and push her up into the air, then let her drop. She thought that it was her physical body and noticed that this took place only when she lay on her back. What actually happened was this: the lady experienced the movement of the astral body as she was about to go to sleep. This frightened her and she repercussed with a shriek. She ran outside, she said, to get air. The astral body seems to rise more quickly when the subject is lying upon his back, and it also seems that one has a tendency to cry out more frequently during a repercussion. Hey, wow, ouch, and ow are utterances most likely to be shrieked out at such a time. Another common sound is as if one had been struck a vigorous blow on the abdomen, so vigorous that it forced the air through the vocal cords, causing a loud grunt. If you're one of those who just cannot sleep upon your back because of unpleasant sensations such as those mentioned, there is a good chance that you will experience conscious projections, but you must suggest to yourself that you like the sensation and practice projection as you are entering sleep. For example, by the means of the elevator dream. It is not as easy to achieve success if you lie upon the left side or upon the stomach. Repercussion noises. Slight repercussions accompanying natural sleep, or even the more severe repercussions like those experienced in falling dreams, will often be accompanied by a peculiar noise which seems close to the ear or inside the head. A very common one is pop, as if a toy balloon burst close to the air. Another is a loud sis, and sometimes a sound inside the brain causing that organ to vibrate. Another is a crackling sound, not unlike the noise made by an electric spark when the positive and negative poles of a battery are touched together. The sound is often heard just as at the takeoff of a projection, as well as at the moment of recoincidence, and seems to be in the head, near the back part of the skull. Still another commonly heard sound at the time of recoincidence is a zing, as if a string were tightly drawn through the head and then struck, as one might strike the strings of a guitar. At other times the subject may hear a distinct word uttered. It seems very close to the ear, and even at times as though the word were spoken right inside the head. The striking thing about these sounds is the way in which they can be felt, yes, actually felt, moving about inside one's head. One's brain seems to shake like the diaphragm of a drum which vibrates when it's struck and resounds. Footnote. One is here reminded, of course, of the head snapping so frequently noted in the case of Mrs. Piper just as she emerges from trance. This has been discussed at considerable length by various researchers in the proceedings and journals of the SPR and elsewhere. H.C. End of footnote. On one occasion, I was projected and was standing about 10 feet from my physical body. A dog began to bark in the street. I heard the dog barking with my physical ears, but could feel it in my astral head. This is very difficult to explain, but is precisely what occurred. It was as if my ears had been projected, and I could feel the sound of the barking inside my astral head. You may have heard of persons who could smell color. Sounds too can evoke colors. Carrington has touched upon the subject in his book Higher Psychical Development. It is interesting to note too that at times during astral projection the subject may see out of different parts of his astral body, that is, he may lie upon his back in the air and see what is taking place below him, while looking in the opposite direction with his eyes. Usually, force of habit compels the projector to use his eyes, but this is not absolutely necessary in all cases. I have never known this to be true, however, outside cord activity range, although it may be. There are persons who can do this in the physical body. I personally know a man who seems to have the ability to see out of his forehead. A.J. Davis, in commenting upon his first experiences along this line, says, "Having tightly secured my bodily eyes with handkerchiefs, he, the operator, then placed the book on a horizontal line with my forehead, and I saw and read the title without the slightest hesitation. This test and many experiments of the kind were tried and repeated, and the demonstration of vision independent of the physical organs of sense was clear and unquestionable. Lombroso and others have recorded many cases in which persons have been able to see by way of the solar plexus, completely independent of the physical eyes. There are times when the projected phantom can also see things which are many miles away, but as a rule the phantom will instantly move to the spot." Light and negative factor. The astral body will separate from the physical with much greater ease in total darkness. Although light has a tendency to bind the astral to the physical more securely, it is true that projection can be accomplished regardless of this fact, but as a rule, only the most advanced student will be successful in doing so. Perhaps knowing this, you may believe it best to attempt development in total darkness, and it is true that many occultists advise this, but for my part I should never offer such advice, for there are many reasons why total darkness is not the most suitable condition for the amateur. Perhaps you will say, "Oh yes, I know why. It is because one wouldn't be able to see if one were exteriorized." No, that is not the reason, for once you are exteriorized and your sense of sight working, the room, which was dark to your physical eyes, is no longer dark, for you are using your astral eyes, and there is a foggish light everywhere, such as you see in your dreams, a diffused light. We might call it a light which seems none too bright, and yet it's not too dim, apparently sifting right through the objects of the material world. Have you ever gone to sleep in total darkness, then awakened and not been able to comprehend where you are? Do you recall what an unpleasant effect the bewilderment of the situation had upon your mind? You will remember that you had no sense of direction, thinking that your head was where your feet should have been, or that the bed was turned around, or that the door of the room was not in the place where it should have been, etc. Most people have at one time or another experienced such an awakening in total darkness when they have lost their sense of direction. One friend told me that he awoke one night in total darkness and tried to find the door of his room, and that he was so bewildered that he went in a direction directly opposite to where the door really was and ran into the dresser. He opened the drawer of the dresser and tried to crawl into it, thinking that he was opening the door. Yet he insists that he was entirely conscious at the time. He then began feeling around the walls for the door, which he eventually found. Suppose, for example, you go to bed with your head at the head of the bed, your feet at the foot of the bed, the window to the right, the door to the left, the dresser to one side, etc. In other words, you go to bed consciously oriented and aware of your position. You go to sleep. Later you awaken and think you are lying in a different position to the one you really occupy. You have lost your sense of direction. Why? Do you think it is because you cannot see in total darkness and that this has caused you to lose your sense of direction? Why does not your consciousness, which told you your true position before you went to sleep, direct you to the door which is to your left? Do you think this is because of lack of vision? If so, why do you not become bewildered in your direction when you go into a dark room? Here is the solution of this problem. You might go to bed consciously aware of your position. In fact, you could get up again before going to sleep and go out of the room with your eyes closed, simply because you know your true position and do not need to see. Why is it that after you have slept for an interval, you sometimes believe that you are in a different position to the one you really occupy? You can get up and walk to the place where you think the door is and find the dresser instead. What has become of that consciousness which knew where you were formerly and could take you from the room with closed eyes? Well, this is what happens oftentimes. When you go to sleep, the astral body rises out of the physical and can lie at a different angle than the physical. The senses during sleep are keen and impress the fact upon the mind that the body is lying at a different angle. When you awaken in the physical, the impression made by the astral body having been at an angle to the physical is in the mind. And of course you think that you are lying at a different angle than you really are, and being unable to see, you cannot prove or disprove the matter. Thus you get up and start toward the spot where you think the door is and to run into the dresser instead, etc. And you will remain under this impression until you can prove by sight or feeling that you are under a delusion. Another way of explaining this point: stand a person in the middle of the street, blindfold him, and yet he will know which way he is going because he was conscious of the direction before being blindfolded. He does not have to depend upon his sight, he knows. But blindfold him and whirl him around and he will lose his sense of direction. And that is how the movement of the astral body during sleep can cause the subject to think that he is in the physical where he was in the astral. While sleeping in total darkness, we are liable to awaken thinking we are in a different position to that in which we really are and give the matter no thought and go to sleep again. If one in this condition of mind, thinking he is in a different position to the one he really occupies, has an extensive projection and suddenly something happens which starts the astral speeding back to the physical, the subconscious will land the astral body at the spot where the subject thought he was and not directly into the physical mechanism. Should a falling dream accompany the fall of the astral body, the subject will think he has, maybe I will read this again. Should a falling dream accompany the fall of the astral body, the subject will think he has been smashed into pieces and have a terrible nightmare before the subconscious mind can discard the suggestion which it took from the conscious mind and realize the fact within itself that the conscious suggestion was a mistake and that the physical body was not lying in that particular spot. Of course, this is the unusual, but the mind can actually delude itself and can work within itself as it were. No one knows positively what the mind can do. I believe that there are a few cases on record where persons have experienced falling dreams in which they were smashed into pieces on hitting the ground or whatnot. I have experienced a few of these particular dreams myself and attribute the causes to what I have just pointed out. Still another undesirable result of developing in total darkness is a sort of reluctance in the subject's mind, and this is markedly true if he has ever undergone the terrifying experience of having a violent repercussion in total darkness with his sense of direction missing. If there is anything which is truly unnerving, it is to experience a violent repercussion accompanied by a terrifying dream and then be unable to see or realize one's true place of reclination after becoming conscious. My advice, especially to the beginner and more especially to the subject of high nervous temperament, is always permit enough light to enter the sleeping chamber so that you can immediately discern your true position in relation to other objects in the room the instant you awaken. If there is anything you do not want to do, it is to lose your sense of direction, for this not only has its physical effects, but often affects the astral body as well, and can even influence the subconscious mind. You will find, I am sure, that a dim twilight is the best possible light condition for the practice of astral body projection. An interiorization caused by excess light. An interesting little experience I once had involving the light element may be given here. The room in which I usually sleep has a window which is directly in line with the street lamp. Lying in bed, I can see the light through the window, and it in turn casts its rays into the sleeping room. Sometimes the lights are turned on at a later hour than at other times by the local electric company, depending upon the time of the year, etc. One night I retired when the light was not on and was succeeding in producing a conscious projection. I had moved upward out of the physical to a distance of about 2 feet. Just at this point on came the lamp, flooding the room with light, and down went the astral into the physical with a zing and a repercussion. I believe that this was the strongest zing sound I've ever heard, and it felt as if my brain inside my skull were trembling, as if I could feel the noise. Have you ever heard the steel run along the length of the string on a Hawaiian guitar? That is exactly like the sound which often accompanies interiorization. From this you can see the detrimental effect of too much light. It might be of interest to add here that many people who suffer from nightmares have found that by sleeping in a lighted room, they have been able to avoid them. So much for the light problem. Carrington, quoting Lancelin, has these additional factors listed which influence astral projection. And as my own experience has not dealt with them, I give them for what they may be worth in influencing your own development. Humidity. The air should be dry and clear, barometer high. Atmospheric electricity. If high, this is prejudicial to the experiment. Sex. This should preferably be male for the projector, female for the recipient or seer of the phantom. Sitters. If possible, projector and seer should be alone. What has been stated concerning sitters is only of interest when the experiment is undertaken in collaboration, that is, when one is attempting to appear to a seer, or where the subject believes that the presence of some sympathetic friend at his side would be beneficial to his success. You will find, I believe, that as a rule, imparting any information to others as to what you're attempting to do will do you no good. About the only time when others can be of assistance, unless they are mediumistic, is when they are asleep. It reminds one of the saying, "You're a good boy, Johnny, when you're asleep." I cannot attempt to explain why the presence of others sleeping near the projector seems to give him strength, but I know positively that this is a fact. And I also know positively that the presence of others awake and near the projector, unless they are mediumistic, tends to exert a repelling force to projection regardless of how quiet they may be. Telepathic repercussion. Here is a little experiment which I first came upon by chance, then tried it intentionally on 2 different subjects and attained similar results. One lazy afternoon, my brother, who was then 12 years old, was lying upon the bed intending to take an afternoon's nap. I thought I would follow his example and lay down beside him. There was a space of about 1 foot between us, and we both were dozing off to sleep. I thinking of astral projection unconsciously, not intending to project but just thinking in a relaxed condition of mind of that seeming miracle which I had so often experienced. My mind was far from tense, far from thinking of the one who lay beside me. I recall that I was just thinking how the astral body moves out of the physical in a casual manner. Thoughts relating to the face naturally followed, one after the other. Then came the thought of how the body often repercussed, and no sooner had the thought entered my mind than my brother had a violent repercussion. If this had happened but once, we might call it coincidence. But when it happens repeatedly, there is some foundation for the belief that the mind of another person can influence the movement of the astral body. So in order to see if this occurrence were mere coincidence, I tried the same arrangement again and procured the same result. Then I tried a variation of the arrangement using mental effort. I would lie down beside my brother about the time he was ready to go to sleep, and by an effort of will I would try to bounce the astral body back into the physical after forcefully suggesting in my mind for some time that he was out of coincidence. But this did not work. The forceful conscious thoughts did not have the same effect as the casual and calm, I might say unconcerned, thoughts of projection and repercussion. I have tried this same experiment on 2 friends since and have found the result to be the same. Casual and calm thoughts of separation and repercussion produced repercussion, while willful and tense thoughts had no apparent effect. It is possible that the subject, while going to sleep, was in a receptive mood, and that the rising of the astral body into the zone of quietude, being in harmony with the thoughts issuing from my mind to that effect, brought about an attunement in which the mind in the astral body received the impressions from my mind by telepathy, and that when my thoughts turned to repercussion, the astral body would fly back into the physical. I am firmly convinced for my part that almost any 2 people can produce this repercussion by doing exactly as I have said, and sympathetic friend try to assist him. I believe that this would be the best possible exercise to attempt first, as it registers, we might say, when the minds are in attunement, and thus the 2 are able to find the route to more extensive experiments. I will give the exercise again precisely as it should be followed. The subject and his helper should lie side by side upon the bed, or wherever the experiment is to be tried. It is best to attempt it at night when one really intends going to sleep. The subject must not think of what is being done. Merely going to sleep is a natural way. The assistant centers his mind upon the fact that the astral body of the subject is rising out of the physical body. There must be no tension in the mind of the assistant. He must merely visualize in an unconcerned manner the astral body of the subject moving out of the physical to a distance of 3 or 4 inches, just as the subject is rising to sleep. And he must not try to force the thought, allowing the vision to bring its own relative thoughts, which concern the astral body, and eventually the thoughts of repercussion. At this last thought, the subject should repercuss, Those who are interested in things occult will find that they will have little difficulty in producing this. The attunement between the subject and his assistant comes about when the subject is rising to sleep, performing the very act which is in the mind of the assistant. From then on, the mental condition of the assistant is what counts for results. By he merely holding the thought and vision of the subject's astral body being in the zone of quietude, and then changing the thought to one of repercussion, it will be found that the repercussion is not severe enough to cause discomfort for more than an instant. However, my advice is to attempt astral projection without the assistance of anyone once you know exactly what to do. When you do this, you develop a stronger self-control, a sort of self-mastery over the situation, and will not be influenced by the conscious or unconscious thoughts transmitted from the minds of others. I have always found it difficult to project when there were others near me. One of the first thoughts one has when he becomes conscious in the projected astral body is of the physical body. When one is projected, the very first thing he does when he senses anyone moving near the spot where the physical body lies is to interiorize. In fact, that is what I have always done, and I believe that any truthful projector will admit that he has a mistrust of anyone who approaches his physical body while he is projected. For many years, I would never attempt a projection unless I were in a locked room, and I have found that in doing so I gained an inner sense of security. You will find it to your advantage to try this. If it is necessary for you to have a seer partake in the experiment, let the seer stay in the next room and have it understood by everyone that they are to keep hands off. Even go as far as Christ went when he said to Mary, "Touch me not." Perhaps you did not understand the significance of this or why one should go to such extremes, but if you ever experience a conscious projection, all these seeming irrelevancies will be self-evident to you. Do not talk to others of what you are trying to accomplish. This is a valuable tip. Perhaps you are not aware of it, but if you are really desirous of producing a projection, keep the desire locked up within yourself. This stresses it, and the stress promotes projection. Talking of projection somehow relieves the stress within you. Footnote: this is of course strictly in harmony with the teachings of New Thought, which also emphasizes this point. H.C. End of footnote. Chapter 11. How to induce incapacity. During natural sleep, we know that the physical body is incapacitated more or less, but in order to make this incapacity more pronounced, the heartbeat must be slowed down. I have already explained how I stumbled upon this fact and that I devised a method of voluntarily slackening the rate of the pulse. Incidentally, the exercise for slowing the pulse also causes concentration and relaxation, thus eliminating the necessity of special exercises for each of these factors. The first thing which you are to do upon retiring for the night or upon resting at any other time is to assume a comfortable horizontal position, preferably upon your back. If you cannot possibly tolerate lying upon your back, then lie upon your right side. I am presuming that you are now reclining in a horizontal position upon your back with your hands lying at your sides. First, take a deep breath, hold it for a second, then try to force that breath into the pit of your stomach so that the diaphragm bulges out at that point. Then exhale, forcing all the air out of your lungs. Repeat this about 6 or 8 times. This is for the purpose of relaxing the solar plexus. A word of advice in this connection from Mr. Carrington's book on yoga will fit in nicely here. It is very essential to feel the relaxation of the solar plexus so that you can consciously feel that it opens like a flower just below the spot where the ribs divide. If that be tense, it will stop your development until you can relax it. the thing to do is to concentrate and get enough control so that you can feel it, and then you can relax. The plexus itself is like a great octopus. It's the biggest nerve center in the body aside from the brain, and is the ruler of the sympathetic system, the digestive and other vegetative functions. So for that reason, the stomach should not be full when these yoga exercises are undertaken, because it would press against the plexus and against the heart. That is one of the reasons why it's very important that the stomach should be empty and the food very light. Next, close your eyes and picture yourself in your mind. Now, starting at the top of your head, think of your scalp and try to move it by tensing the proper muscles. Next, think of your jaw and tense and relax it a few times. Then think of your neck, tense and relax the muscles in it a few times. Next, your upper arms, then your lower arms, then grip your fists and relax them. Then, starting at the base of the neck, go downward, thinking of each part of the body in turn and trying to tense the muscles at each particular spot until eventually you are tensing and relaxing your toes, like a cat tensing and relaxing its paws while purring. Now concentrate upon your heart, not with tension of mind, but think of that organ with relaxed thought. You will presently notice its pulsations and be able to feel them at that spot in your chest. Keep your mind centered upon these pulsations until they are very pronounced, until you can both feel and hear them distinctly. Footnote: remember, you do not feel these pulsations with your hand. Keep your hands at your sides. You must feel the heart within you pulsating. SM. End of footnote. These are the same pulsations which you feel in the back of your head when you are projected and within cord activity range, and they are in fact the only genuine physical feelings you possess while projected, unless you feel the weight of the bed covering over you, etc. That is, when within cord activity range, a duplicate sensation permits the pulsations to be felt as they are in the physical counterpart, and as you can now feel them by concentration upon your heartbeat. The easiest way is to lie upon the left side, but not the preferable way. After you have acquired the ability to lie still and both feel and hear your heartbeat within your chest, which you will no doubt acquire in 1 or 2 trials, your next step is to be able to feel and hear the pulsations in any part of your body by concentrating upon that particular spot. I am now assuming that you are lying according to my instructions, and while in a relaxed condition of mind, can both feel and hear your heart pulsations. Listen to them, the pulsations, closely. They are going thump, 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 thump. Now shift your center of concentration to your neck. You can feel your heart beating in your neck. Thump, thump, thump. Now that you can feel the pulsations in your neck, shift your thought to your cheeks, and you will soon feel them there. Just as soon as you have pronounced pulsations in your cheeks, then go to the top of your head and center your thought on that steady thump, thump, thump. Now you will feel them there. Now that you can feel the pulsations in your scalp, shift your thought back again over each particular spot, the cheeks, the neck, the chest, and keep on going downward. Now you can feel them in the pit of your stomach. Do not shift your concentration until they are very pronounced. There they are, thump, thump, thump. Now you can concentrate a little further down in the lower abdomen. That is an easy place to feel the pulsations, almost as easy as feeling them in your neck. Now that they are perfectly plain, you can concentrate upon your thighs both at once. There you feel the thumb, thumb, thumb. Now concentrate upon the calves of your legs, and as soon as you can feel the pulsations regularly and plainly, concentrate upon your feet, the very soles of your feet, and you will be able to feel your heart pulsations very plainly in your feet just by thinking about them. Now go back to your calves again. There you feel them. Now go back to your thighs again. There are the pulsations. Next, concentrate on your right thigh and forget about the left one. See, you can feel the pulsations of your heart anywhere you concentrate. The next time you have cold feet, literally, try to increase the circulation in your feet by doing what you have just done. Footnote: it is also possible by proper concentration to withdraw the blood from different parts of the body. SM. End of footnote. If you will concentrate upon the medulla oblongata region and cause the pulsations to be felt there, you will know exactly how the pulsations feel at that point through the astral cable to the projected phantom. One word of advice before going further. If you're a victim of heart disease, do not attempt astral projection, for the heart is a vital factor and often runs very low during a projection. And as you know, the welfare of the physical mechanism during the projection of the astral body depends upon the function of respiration. On the other hand, if your heart is reasonably sound, there is nothing to be alarmed at in the suggestion. Now that you have the knack of feeling your heart's pulsations in any part of the body through concentration, the next step is to be able to reduce the speed of the pulsations, which is not difficult to do. What is desired in astral projection is a slow and steady heartbeat. During your concentration upon the organ, assume that you are one intelligence and that it is another, and that it can understand your thought and obey it. For that in reality is about the true situation. The heart is controlled by an intelligence behind it, the subconscious intelligence. Your thoughts, your concentration can be considered another intelligence. So if you desire to increase or decrease the speed of your heart, assume that it's governed by intelligence. Perhaps you have tried to drive thoughts or directions into your subconscious mind and have afterwards said to yourself, how do I know whether or not my suggestions convince the innate intelligence? Well, with your heart you can tell. If you concentrate upon it, thinking that it is beating slower and slower, or faster and faster, as the case may be, and it obeys your suggestion, then you know that your suggestion has reached the controlling intelligence. And further, if you know the mood your conscious mind is in, when it is able to control the heart, then you know what mood that mind should be in at any other time when you wish to sink thoughts into your subconscious mind. Many people become annoyed when they think that their subconscious mind will not obey the very first conscious suggestion it is given. Many do not like the job of repeating and repeating over and over an affirmation before the subconscious mind will obey. But think a minute, what would happen if the controlling intelligence did act upon the very first affirmation? Suppose you should think your heart had stopped, and suppose the innate intelligence should immediately obey that suggestion. Wouldn't that be a fine mess? Fortunately, the subconscious mind is not so easily controlled, yet it is not very difficult to persuade it to slacken or speed up the heartbeat. To resume, we are now supposing that you are lying upon your back, relaxed, with your arms at your sides, and that you have acquired the ability to feel your heart's pulsations in any part of your body. Now you're concentrating upon your heart again, and if it's not steady, you are to tell it in your mind that it is steady, and that you are to catch the rhythm of the proper beat and beat time in your mind, concentrating upon the thump of your heart at the proper rhythm. Keep the exercise up until your heart is beating steadily. Now, if it had before been unsteady and you have steadied it, or if it be naturally steady and healthy, you are now ready to concentrate upon a slower beat. Think only of these pulsations. Concentrate upon these pulsations which you feel in your chest, in your heart. Beat time to them in your mind, even allowing your head to move slightly at each beat, if it be inclined to. After keeping up this true rhythm for several minutes, begin beating time in your mind just a little slower, thinking that the heart is beating a little more slowly. Do not stop concentrating in order to determine whether or not the heart is obeying your suggestion, for you will be able to know this fact in your mind. Continue your concentration in this manner until you have the heart beating at the speed at which you wish it to beat. This is not nearly as difficult to accomplish as you might think, and most people without a doubt will be enabled to do this after a very few trials. One cannot say definitely how slowly the heart should beat in order to induce a fair degree of physical incapacity. You will recall that my heartbeat when experiencing projections regularly was 42 pulsations per minute. This speed could never be considered dangerously slow, yet it brought about passivity of the physical to an unusual degree. Of course, the pulsations of the heart usually are less per minute while we are asleep than when we are awake, so that if my heart were beating at 42 per minute while awake, it must have been considerably slower whilst I was asleep. It is the circulation of the blood, you understand, which enlivens or, on the other hand, produces torpor in the physical body. In other words, the degree of this incapacity. The normal heartbeat, of course, can be said to vary more or less in different individuals, and while the physical body naturally is incapacitated to some extent during sleep, it is obvious that a reduction in the pulsations of 10 or 15 below normal will incapacitate the physical mechanism still more profoundly. You can determine your own condition of passivity far better than anyone else can do so for you. You can reduce it amazingly, so much so that it can scarcely be detected in its beating. If before going to sleep you should feel yourself becoming chilly when you should not be, or believe that you can feel air blowing lightly upon your legs or arms, you have the evidence of incapacity, which will be profound when you do sleep. You do not, however, want to be cool to the extent of discomfort. Try to hit upon some arrangement whereby you can be both cool and comfortable. On the other hand, if you do not fancy the slow heart idea and would prefer to try the experiment with the usual degree of passivity you possess during sleep with a normal heartbeat, you can do so and still not be immune to success, for as you know, many projections take place in this degree of physical calm. Naturally, the greater the incapacity, the greater the chance of success, and it is for this reason that I have given the instructions for producing more profound incapacity. The zone of quietude in natural sleep is governed very much by the condition of the physical body. The more lively the physical, the closer will the phantom stay to coincidence, just as it is governed by the amount of energy stored in the condenser, the astral body. Profound incapacity plus enervation, and the phantom could move 2 feet out of coincidence as you enter sleep. On the other hand, if you go to bed without being tired, having an abundance of energy plus physical enlivenment, you may not be able to go to sleep. And when you do, the phantom might only discoincide a fraction of an inch from the physical. Go to bed with enervation, but without physical passivity, and the phantom might move but 6 inches out of coincidence, etc., depending upon the factors involved. As a rule, the phantom moves upward more and more as sleep becomes more and more profound. As one rises to sleep, the phantom may rest but 2 inches out of coincidence, but after sleeping for several hours, the phantom may be 1 foot out of coincidence, because the physical body had gradually become more passive. Most projections take place after the subject has slept for several hours for this reason. After you have gained the knack of slowing down the speed of the heart, you will be surprised at the way in which that organ responds to your directions, and you will be able to reduce your pulse rate in a few moments. After you have practiced the exercise and can control the organ at will, then do this. Speak to your heart. Say, for example, heart, you are now to beat 50 times per minute, and do so until further notice. You will be amazed to find that this organ will keep going at this speed until you tell it to do otherwise. It is just like hypnotizing the controlling intelligence behind the heart. But do not give the heart this direction, then grab your watch and say, I don't believe it is doing it, as you time it to see, for this offsets the suggestion you have just given it. If you insist on timing it, do so with the belief that the heart is beating 50 times per minute. Heart control is, as far as I know, the only sure way in which voluntary incapacity can be produced. And in practicing it, you are unconsciously promoting consciousness of self, one of the most essential requisites in projection of the astral body. Always remember to amass all the factors which are favorable to the incapacity of the physical body that you possibly can, just prior to your attempt to project the astral body, regardless of the method you use to impress the subconscious will. So much for incapacity. Developing a consciousness of self. In order to be a successful projector, you should center your mind upon yourself, study yourself, get inquisitive about yourself, try to know yourself. There is only one person just like you in the whole world, and that is you. Stop studying other people for a while and begin to study yourself. You do not have to look 92 million miles away at the sun in order to find something to marvel over. The sun is no more mysterious than you are. When you begin to investigate yourself in this manner, you will wonder that you knew so little about yourself before. Several years ago, I believe it was in Physical Culture magazine, I read an article by a well-known writer who stated that the majority of persons had no idea what their bare backs look like. They had never seen their own spine in a mirror, yet these same people believe they know themselves. In astral projection, a consciousness of self is highly important, so begin now to study yourself. Here is an exercise which I believe brought me successful results, and you will find it invaluable as an aid to astral projection. Place a chair before a mirror, for you are now about to try to bewilder yourself with yourself. In this exercise, you are to study yourself so intensely that you almost go to sleep while doing so and lose your understanding of which is the real you. I'm assuming that you are now comfortably seated in an armchair facing your reflection in the mirror. Do not think of the mirror and do not believe that you are looking at a reflection. Try rather to convince yourself that you actually are where the reflection is, that you are not in your real body at all. Now begin to scrutinize yourself carefully, trying to find things about yourself which you have never recognized before. See the true color of your hair, the true expression of your eyes, the true shape of your nose. See that cheekbone, those few whiskers on your chin, the lumps on your forehead, the little ridges around your nose. Yes, there is enough to keep you busy looking at and studying yourself for some time, so keep it up. Now that you have given yourself a concentrated examination, stand up in front of the mirror and look directly into your eyes. Keep your eyes centered on the eyes in the reflection. Blink when you're inclined to, but keep your eyes on the eyes in the mirror. Are you growing unsteady now? Are you swaying slightly from side to side? That is what you should do. Now sit down again in the chair and gaze directly into the eyes in the mirror, keeping your stare concentrated upon these eyes. As you do this, repeat your own name over and over, distinctly and monotonously. This has a very subtle effect upon the mind. If after a while your eyes seem to be getting dim or misty, do not let this distract your attention, but keep everlastingly gazing into your own eyes. In your mind, you are to believe that the reflection in the mirror is the real you. You are not to remember the fact that you are sitting in the chair. Believe only that the real you is the reflection in the mirror. Try to go to sleep with this in mind, and with your eyes centered upon the eyes in the mirror. This delusion of self rattles the astral body, for it puts the idea in the subconscious mind that the reflection is the real you. And after you go to sleep, the suggestion to that effect is often strong enough to possess the subconscious will to move the astral body over to the place where the innate mind thinks you really are. Remember, it makes no difference how true the suggestion coming from the subconscious mind really is. If the mind is deluded by the belief that you are at the spot shown in the reflection, it impresses the subconscious will to that effect. You can try this at night if you wish to, intending to go to sleep in the chair. Or you can practice the exercise until you are dog-tired, then jump into bed and go to sleep at once, keeping the vision in mind. Needless to say, in this exercise you are to use your own eyes in the mirror as you would a crystal ball. It would be a good idea also to read up on how to develop crystal gazing and apply it in this exercise, for space cannot be devoted to that subject here. This is an excellent exercise involving the specific requirements of astral projection. Dynamization of projection. One of the strongest aids to projection of the astral body is realization of astral body phenomena, that is, an understanding of the true facts of the actions of the astral body, the causes for these actions, etc. These must be firmly fixed in mind. Sometimes the realization will suddenly burst upon you, and you will wonder how you ever missed such obvious realities before. Some of the readers of this book may perhaps open their eyes to these phenomena of self after studying it, and will almost immediately begin to notice symptoms of astral body activity which had hitherto passed them by without a second thought. Read about the phenomenon, think of the phenomenon, and practice the phenomenon intensely if you would become a projector. Root an understanding of the phenomenon in your mind so deeply that it becomes a part of your life. Become so bound up in the study of astral projection that you will become almost irritable if you are interrupted when thinking and studying and learning about it. That is the big secret in making yourself express the phenomenon. Remember, I'm now telling you of another method of causing the astral body to project, that is, by stressing astral projection in your mind. This is the direct method, and when it becomes part of the subconscious mind, the mind is obsessed by the knowledge that the astral body can exist apart from the physical, as well as in coincidence with the physical, and the mind sees, therefore, no reason why the astral body should not be outside the physical. Do you see the significance of this? You are to so thoroughly saturate your subconscious mind with astral projection that it creates a stress of astral projection in your mind. You do this by way of the conscious mind through tenacious study of the art, practice of the art, thinking of the art. Have one great ambition to project your astral body. Become wrapped up in this one ambition, and you are not only creating a strong desire, which the subconscious mind, which now knows all about projection, tries to appease, but you are creating a tenacious habit, and will often begin to dream of the phenomenon. This will be especially probable if you go to bed reading about it and go to sleep with it in mind. Mark this: if you ever begin to dream of astral projection, that is, dream that your astral body can and does do these things, you are positively sure to experience a projection of the astral body. How could you have dreamt of the actual phenomenon until now? For you did not fully understand it. Perhaps you never knew you possessed an astral body. But now you can saturate your mind so thoroughly with the understanding of the face that you have a clear vision of it and become so profoundly interested in the matter that it will be a part of your very life, and you can dream about it. I know positively that dreaming of astral projection will cause the projection of the astral body. Even a dream of projection brought about by the fear of projection will pull out the dream body. I shall now explain how fear exerts both a negative and positive effect upon projection depending upon the circumstances under which the fear manifests. When I first experienced conscious projection of the astral body, I'll admit I used to be afraid, not during the projection, that is the strange part, but before going to sleep. The wonder of it gripped my mind beyond words, gripped me more than anything else ever gripped me. I somehow conceived the idea, mostly as a result of hearing others tell about it, that fiends, murderers, and all sorts of devils lurked on the astral plane, waiting to get into people. One prominent spiritualist informed me that some devil might influence me while projected, or that he might get into my physical body and prevent me from getting back into it again. I admit that I was frightened, so frightened at first that I was afraid to go to sleep at night. I had the whole phenomenon firmly fixed in my mind and would always begin to think of it, to vision it, just as soon as I went to bed, because of my fear that I should project and would be apprehended by some astral monster. And what did this fear do? It made me project all the more, for my mind was so saturated by the knowledge of what took place and intensified by fear which externalized my neuric energy as it does everyone else's, making me still more subject to extensive separations, that no sooner would I fall asleep than I would be dreaming of projection, and every single time the astral body would be pulled out by the suggestion coming from my mind. Many times I would become conscious emerging from the dream state, and many times I would merely dream the action out, with the body participating. Repercussions were a nightly occurrence, but the fact which baffled me the most was this: why was I so terribly frightened when in the physical, or when first awakening within cord activity range, which would cause repercussion, while when free, that is, when waking outside cord activity range, I would have no fear whatever. This was one of the observations that impressed me the most forcibly, why the fear disappeared. It was like a player before a football game, or a prize fighter before the fight began, dreadfully fearful and nervous, but suddenly losing all fear and becoming composed. Yet that was the way I experienced it. After a while, I became so accustomed to projection that I began to really like it. The devils and astral fiends did not seem to be so concerned about me after all, and they were not, so far as I could see, when I did happen to see anyone, very different from the people I had always known. Footnote: the reader can rest assured that the actual projection of the astral body is anything but what the imagination believes it to be. It is the suspense in the mind which is unpleasant, not the actual projection. No doubt, this is true of permanent projection death also. SM. End of footnote. As the fear of projection left me, I noticed that the projections themselves began to occur less often, and as desire replaced the fear, I again noticed that I was becoming more subject to them. I know now that fear and desire produce the same effect in the subconscious mind, carrying the suggestion of astral projection into sleep, or bursting forth in the mind while one sleeps. My subconscious mind had been fairly saturated with the knowledge of what my astral body could do and by the desire to do it. And that is how you too can develop yourself. Simply dynamize the subconscious mind with a true knowledge of and desire for astral projection. With your mind so dynamized, go to sleep. You can saturate your subconscious mind with this knowledge and desire by way of the conscious. Think projection, practice projection, and read of projection over and over again. Go to sleep reading about it. Concentrate on going to sleep, on the route which the phantom will take when projected. This latter statement is very important, and I have found that once the mind is dynamized, it is one of the best possible forces tending towards success. But you could not have done this before, for no one had ever before told you the route which the phantom invariably takes in projecting until you read it in this book. Henceforth, whenever a dynamization of projection is mentioned, it simply means the saturation of the subconscious mind with the knowledge of and desire for projection of the astral body. And you cause the saturation of the subconscious mind by way of the conscious mind and the conscious will. What is will? What is the conscious will, you may ask? Allow me to quote C. Frankwell Leavitt. A lot of nonsense has been written about the cultivation of the will. Most books on the subject get a person nowhere, for they do not explain the process of willing. We have a habit of thinking that to will means making oneself do something, getting into action, effort. It does mean making oneself do something. It means getting into action mentally. It means effort of the attention. William James points out that this is all will amounts to: attention, simply to hold the attention upon a certain thought or idea until it fills the mind and crowds all other ideas out of the consciousness. You will have little trouble making yourself do a certain thing if no other idea is allowed to stay in your mind, for the ideas which impel one to action are those which dominate the consciousness, those which possess the attention. Think resolutely and determinedly. Make plans for carrying out your thoughts into action. Concentrate, shut out all opposing thoughts. In time, you will find yourself acting in accordance with these thoughts. After you have acquired this dynamization of projection, after you have your subconscious mind completely saturated with the knowledge of and the desire for projection of the astral body, then your hardest task is over. But remember, above everything else, that your mind must be dominated by this knowledge of and desire for that which you seek. Then the stress of it stays at the surface of that mind while you sleep. You have the knowledge of the art, and the desire stimulates the subconscious will, performing the projection. Typical dreams of projection. Dynamization of projection should produce a dream of projection, and always will if the astral body is in a particular conscious condition and the stress of projection is active during sleep. The substance of the dream of projection will depend upon the degree of understanding of projection in your mind. Therefore, it is of vital importance to have a thorough understanding of the phantom's actions and of its route after separation. Now do you see the fundamental principle of dream control, trying to dream a dream which is true concerning the phantom? The easiest way to produce such a dream is to have the understanding of and desire for projection take such a grip on your mind that you cannot go to sleep without thinking about it. Then, when you do go to sleep, the stress is still there. It is the stress which does the business. The stress in this case consists in suggesting the very thing you are trying to accomplish. You will remember that I stated that dream control was the easiest method of projecting the astral body. Now I'm telling you that dynamization of projection is the easiest method of dream control, for the dynamization of a desire for and knowledge of the astral body's movement will produce the proper dream. For many years my mind was completely dynamized with projection. In fact, I could think of nothing but projection of the astral body, and I would have dream after dream, night after night, that I was projecting in the astral body, and in many of these dreams I would become conscious while projected. In the dream of projection, I would sometimes dream that I was lying horizontal just above my body, even knowing in the dream that I was dreaming. That is the difficult thing to comprehend. And then I would dream of moving over the route which the phantom actually takes on projecting. One is so near true consciousness when he dreams that he's dreaming, and it is a dream of projection that true consciousness cannot seem to keep from intervening. And that is how most of my conscious projections came about. On other occasions the dream would vary. Instead of dreaming that I was rising in the astral body, I seemed to be standing to one side, watching the astral body project, and then, after a while, I would get into the astral body, sometimes continuing to dream of being there, and sometimes actually awakening in it. There are several possible, though purely theoretic explanations which I might advance to account for this. Thus, I once noticed that the instant I dreamt of getting into the already projected astral body, I became conscious in that body. Keep in mind that consciousness withdraws from the astral body when unconsciousness is produced. It is not the astral body's withdrawal from the physical body which causes unconsciousness, never. For the astral body can be conscious outside the physical body, and the astral body can be unconscious outside the physical body, and the astral body can be unconscious within the physical body. Because the astral body moves into the zone of quietude during sleep, this does not in any sense denote that the astral body's withdrawal is the cause of unconsciousness. It merely occurs in that way, merely appears that way, but withdrawal of the astral body from the physical body and the intervention of unconsciousness, while usually occurring almost simultaneously, are entirely separate functions. If we became unconscious every time the astral body withdrew from the physical, there could be no such thing as conscious astral projection. As a matter of fact, many of us can, in the hypnagogic state, when entering sleep, move into the zone of quietude, perhaps only a quarter of an inch of this coincidence, and still be conscious, not realizing the fact that we have done so, and suddenly repercuss in the physical body. This is very common occurrence, because unconsciousness usually occurs when entering sleep. Just an instant before we make the transit into the zone of quietude, many occultists have seized upon the idea that the withdrawal of the astral body is the cause of unconsciousness, but this is a mistake. It is true also that we can be unconscious in the physical body for some time before the astral body moves into the zone of quietude. This is especially true when the body is under the influence of some stimulant. Thus, there are exceptions to the rule as to when the astral body moves into the zone of quietude, the rule being that it does so immediately after unconsciousness has set in. In some persons it moves sooner, in others later, depending entirely upon the condition of the individual at the time. One can see that in order to have a conscious projection, conscious from the beginning, one should be of the type or makeup which begins to make the transit into the zone of quietude before unconsciousness sets in. This condition of the individual is brought about by several factors: temperament, incapacity, etc., as we have already seen. Knowing that it's the withdrawal of consciousness from the astral body which produces unconsciousness, we might in this manner account for the dream in which one dreams that he is projected in the astral body but is apart from that body, looking on, because the real consciousness is apart from that body. And this theory becomes still more probable in those cases when one has a dream of projection wherein he is apart from the astral body, looking on, watching its movements, and then getting into the body and being conscious in that body the moment he dreams of getting into it. Now, if full consciousness withdraws from the body when the astral body is unconscious, consciousness must be partially withdrawn from the body when it's partially conscious. And in a dream of this nature, when one dreams that he is watching the astral body's movement and then gets into it, is it not possible that a portion of the consciousness which was withdrawn from the body actually understood? Or perhaps even a more refined body, coinciding with the astral body, could withdraw in such a dream and look on as the astral body followed its route, then go over and get into the astral body again. Footnote: this would correspond, of course, to the mental body of the Theosophists and might be said to afford some direct experimental evidence in favor of the reality of such a body. H.C. End of footnote. At any rate, these are the two typical dreams of projection which I had when dreaming of projection. First, dreaming that I was in the astral body, moving over the route the phantom takes while projecting. Second, dreaming that I stood apart from the astral body, watching the astral body go over the route, and that I would then get into it. If you will think back, you will recall that I mentioned that one can sometimes see the astral body from the physical eyes because of the circuit of sight running across the astral cable. Now, if one can see this while conscious, why not while partially conscious, and thus dream that he is standing to one side watching the astral body move? For my part, I believe that this is a plausible explanation of such a dream of projection, when we dream that we are watching the astral body project. The most direct way, and certainly the most sensible way of creating the proper stress in the subconscious mind, which will suggest itself during sleep, is the way that I have just pointed out, that is, dynamization of projection. Why, I would ask you, should you go to the trouble of saturating your mind with a habit which is unrelated to projection of the astral body, merely because the stress of that habit will impress the subconscious will, when you can saturate your mind in the same manner with the desire for and knowledge of the art, and thus being able to dream directly of what is occurring instead of dreaming of some habit? For example, your routine. How to instill the stress of routine. However, if you wish to put a stress of routine into your subconscious mind, which will assert itself while you sleep, you must direct all your conscious willpower upon this routine. You must stick with determination to your course throughout the day, never diverting from it under any circumstances. Go to bed on time, get up on time, eat your meals on time, performing your duties regularly and conscientiously day after day, until the routine becomes a part of your very life, until your mind has crowded all other impressions into the background and you are almost automatic in performing the routine. With your mind so saturated with the stress of the habit, you must hold the vision of yourself performing the routine as you rise to sleep, instigating complete passivity of the physical body prior to taking up the vision of the routine. The subconscious will act according to the power of the suggestion. We enact habits for one of two reasons, or perhaps in some cases for both. These reasons are, first, because we desire to perform the duty, and second, because necessity compels us to perform the duty. Granting this to be true, the stress of the routine in the mind will impress the subconscious will accordingly. If you desire the routine, the subconscious will move the body more easily than if you were compelling yourself to perform the routine through necessity, which means simply that desire plus habit will dominate the subconscious will more completely than habit alone. Dynamization of projection is much easier to put into the subconscious mind than dynamization of a routine, for the routine is too commonplace to grip the mind as powerfully as astral projection, the supernormal, will grip it. To me, attempting to develop projection of the astral body by the tenacious habit method seems emphatically the most difficult method of all. And if I'm any judge of human nature, most people will have no inclination to stick so tenaciously to their daily commonplace routine. Dynamization of projection is as far ahead of dynamization of a routine in the production of astral projection, and the steamboat is ahead of the sailboat. Yet either will lead one eventually to the destination he is seeking. Develop a strong habit to the study of astral projection. Make a routine of the practice of the art. Desire the ability to project in your astral body so strongly that your mind is dominated by astral projection. Induce complete passivity of the physical body and rise to sleep, visualizing the routine the phantom invariably takes on projecting. That is the way to project at will. You may think it pretty difficult to project the astral body after all, but when you stop to think that the very causes of astral projection come about unknowingly at times, it should convince you that to instigate these causes intentionally should not be such an exacting task after all. How to instill the stress of thirst. You will find that in promoting a stress of desire, which is not directly for projection, that the desire for drink is the most easily instigated and the strongest possible creation stress. If you think that thirst is not stress-creating, just try and see how long you can go without water. Drink is a necessity. Thirst must be quenched. The mind becomes determined to satisfy the desire, and in projection of the astral body, the subconscious will act in a like manner. Method, and one which I have proved to be successful in promoting projection of the astral body, is the following. First, deprive yourself of drinking for a considerable period of time before retiring, presuming of course that you are attempting the experiment on going to bed at night. The length of time during which you must refrain from taking liquids into the system must be calculated by yourself, as different individuals vary as to the amount of liquid required. It's a good plan to begin in the morning to deprive yourself of drink, and if the desire becomes too intense as the day progresses, take a sip of water now and then, temporarily to allay the desire. Toward evening, just before retiring, if the desire for water becomes too intense, take a few sips of salt water. In this way, you satisfy the desire in some degree for a short interval, but the desire comes back stronger than ever later on. Also, during the day, try to increase the desire for drink by almost drinking, thinking of drinking, gazing into a tumbler of water, etc. Just before going to bed, place a glass of cold water in some place where you're accustomed to getting a drink, say in the sink in the kitchen. Take a chair and look into the glass of water, concentrating upon the water in the glass. Keep your eyes fixed upon the water, and as you do so, center your mind upon your astral body, visualizing it as leaving your physical body in the room where you sleep and traveling to the sink to drink the water which is before you in the glass. Have this vision of the route which the astral body will take in going to the sink for water firmly fixed in your mind. Repeat this mental process again and again, all the while gazing steadily at the glass of water. Now you are ready to go to bed and go to sleep. You are thirsty when you do so, but forget about the thirst and begin thinking of your heart, slowing it down by concentration upon it. If you cannot possibly go to sleep, you will then have to take another sip of water, preferably salt water, and the desire will keep on increasing even after you sleep. but the fact that you cannot go to sleep with ease shows that the stress of thirst is very strong within you. And this same stress, which is keeping you awake so long, is the stress which will impel the subconscious will to move the body after you do go to sleep. As you go to sleep, keep thinking of the glass of water. Keep thinking of your astral body moving out and going to the glass of water. If you have the proper incapacity induced in the physical body, the astral body during sleep will move away from the physical and attempt to appease the desire. The route you pre-planned will at once suggest itself and the body will travel over that route. I want to tell you that this is an extreme exercise and will easily move the astral body, for, as a matter of fact, the desire for water alone will move the astral body, and the mind will direct the body over a route to some place where one can drink, without pre-planning the route and place. Yet in going to the above extreme with the exercise, you are more sure of success. After you have practiced this exercise for a while, analyze your dreams and see whether you have had a dream which would relate to the action. You might even become conscious while projected, but if you do not, then concentrate upon the fact while practicing the exercise that when you get to the glass of water, you will awaken. See yourself becoming conscious just as you touch the glass of water. Then, when you do project and touch the glass, at least the space where the glass is, the suggestion that you become conscious will present itself. You can instigate the desire for food in the same manner and intensify the desire by the same method as you intensify the desire for drink, causing the astral body to move out to appease your hunger. This is not quite so unpleasant as the thirst method. If you are a very hearty eater, this method will succeed. But on the other hand, if you are one of those who find little concern in eating, the stress created by the fast will not possess your mind so completely. You can create your own exercise while inducing the hunger stress, for if you do not understand the principles involved in the projection of the astral body, by this time you are not yet ready to project. In speaking of development, in his book devoted to yoga, Carrington says, the first step is abstinence from stimulating foods and drinks. The pituitary body and the pineal gland are said to be stimulated excessively by these things, which affect the bloodstream in the brain. This is one thing too which you must always keep in mind when attempting to develop astral projection, for stimulating drinks and foods work against incapacity of the physical body. Mention was made before of the fact that certain foods are said to affect the astral body, and you will recall that some investigators have claimed that one diet has a loosening effect upon the astral body, while another a binding effect. But be that as it may, I believe that I have tried more diets than anyone else in the world for the purpose of loosening the astral counterpart, much to my regret, and I have eventually came to the conclusion that even if certain foods do tend to loosen the astral body, the effect is too insignificant for consideration. It is the stress in the mind which moves out the body, and no food at all is the way to create the proper stress. I believe that you will only delude yourself if you think that you can cause astral projection by certain diets, unless the diet creates hunger, just as a fast will do, or unless the diet favors incapacity, thus aiding other factors in projection. That is about all a certain diet can do, that is, aid the major factors of projection. Projecting to water. When experimenting with the thirst stress, I had the following experience. There is a spring gurgling forth from the roots of a tree just at the bottom of a wooded hill within sight of where I am now writing this account. In order to get to the spring, I would have to cross the road in front of the house, go about a quarter of a mile along the river to a bridge, cross the bridge, walk along the railroad track a short distance to the spot where the track neared the foot of the hill. I had a hobby of strolling along this route often, and on reaching the spring would sit down beside it. I dearly loved to drink the water from that spring, and do yet for that matter, and time after time I have strolled over to the spring just to have a drink of its water. Somehow I liked the spring water much better than the water in the village, so one afternoon I took the jar and went across the river to the spring, filled the jar and returned. That night I placed a tumbler full of the water in the sink, where I always drink when at home, and gazed at it for about 20 minutes before going to bed. I expected to project to the sink and the water. But instead of projecting to the sink, where the tumbler of the spring water stood, I awakened in the astral body right by the spring. The astral body had passed the sink, passed the river, and stopped at the spring across the river. No dream preceded the awakening this time, as is usually the case. I just awoke suddenly to find myself at that spot. Allow me to say that it's always desirable to have some dream precede the awakening, for unless it does so, one becomes agitated for a time. The dream allows consciousness to come on gradually. Chapter 12. Conscious projection is rare. Rarely does an astral projector ever experience projections which are completely conscious from beginning to end. I know this to be a fact, not only from my own experience, but by reading the experiences of others. Most accounts of astral projections begin when the subject finds himself in a new body, outside his physical body. That is, the subject does not become conscious until he is already projected some distance from his physical body, that is, outside core activity range. Some projectors claim to understand just how they get there. Others frankly admit that they do not understand the reasons why. But one thing has always puzzled me. If the projectors who understand how they do so really do understand the process, why have they not made it known? I have understood this process for many years and presumed that all students of the occult understood it more or less. It was not until I began to turn my attention to what others had written about the subject that I was convinced that the process was not generally understood after all. It is easy to tell people what happens once the astral body is projected, but telling them how to cause the projection is another matter. It is easy to say, I will not reveal the process of actually separating the bodies, as most adepts of this phase do, under the claim that it would be giving dangerous information, which would lead to disastrous consequences. I have concluded that the reason why none of these sages have given the detailed process of projection is not because they are concerned as to the dangers involved, but because they do not know. They know that certain practices will ensure projection of the astral body, but they do not know why these practices produce desired result. They know that they have awakened outside the physical body, but not knowing why, they have pronounced it a gift or said that it was spontaneous. And the fact that most tales of conscious astral projection begin after the astral body has left the physical points with certainty to the conclusion that an entirely conscious projection from beginning to end is very rare. And a completely conscious projection is rare. I believe I have said before that in most instances consciousness only comes after one is already projected, and this is the most desirable way of having consciousness intervene too, for consciousness from the very beginning permits the subject to experience certain undesirable activities which take place within core activity range. However, I have produced such a projection conscious from the very beginning several times, and have experienced unintentional projections of this type on several other occasions. You will remember that my very first projection was conscious from the outset. Whenever a projection of this type took place, I always noticed it did so after I had been sleeping for several hours. I would awaken between 1 and 4 o'clock in the morning, usually, and the astral body would begin to rise as I entered sleep again. But on the other occasions, as in the first experience quoted, the projection would begin in the hypnagogic state when emerging from sleep. I will tell you what takes place in each of these states. First, the hypnagogic state emerging from sleep, and second, the hypnagogic state when going to sleep, respectively. The first experience quoted is an example of what takes place when a conscious projection occurs in the hypnagogic state following sleep. One begins to awaken slowly, unable to understand where he exists, but conscious that he does exist somewhere. Close your eyes and seal your ears, and you will have some idea of the condition which one is in just before the takeoff in a projection. Consciousness grows slightly stronger, and one understands that he is lying upon the bed before he can see or hear, and there will be a very noticeable pulsation in the back of the head. This is the heartbeat. Often this is the very first thing one does notice, even before he can understand that he is lying upon the bed. Presently the subject will realize that he cannot move, and if he wishes to produce the projection, he must have no desire to move physically, but must think of rising into the air. But he cannot try to move up into the air by trying to use effort, for this would interfere with the power which actually moves the body. At this time, one merely lies quiet without emotion and thinks of moving upward. The subject will feel as if he weighed a ton, as if he were glued down to the bed. Eventually he will feel as if this glue holding him down has lost its adhesiveness, and that he is like a balloon. When the anchor is disconnected, he begins to move upward. Then the floating sensation is present, because the astral body really is floating. The subject must lie perfectly calm, enjoying the sensation of floating and thinking only of moving upward and outward. He will be cataleptic as a rule until after the power has moved him outside cord activity range, but he becomes free from catalepsy sometimes after the body has uprighted, when within cord activity range, but he never becomes free from catalepsy while the body is in the horizontal position. He could not and remain horizontal. All the time within cord activity range, the subject can feel the heart's pulsations in the back of his head, and there will almost always be present in some form or another the eccentricities which you have studied and which will manifest within the range. Once outside the range of cord activity, the phantom is free and is possessed of the most indescribable agility and acceleration. This is where most people who have experienced a conscious projection first gain consciousness. Most of the accounts begin like this: once more I found myself outside my body, possessed of a freedom which I could never describe. Is not this the most desirable place to become conscious? It certainly is. There is nothing undesirable in astral projection when one can awaken with such an enlivened feeling and be perfectly free. Notice that when a conscious projection begins during the second hypnagogic state, emerging from sleep, the subject will feel the disconnection of the two bodies. But when the projection occurs during the first hypnagogic state, entering sleep, the astral body rises up so easily that the subject scarcely knows that he has moved upward until suddenly he sees this to be the case. When the sense of hearing first begins to manifest, the sounds seem very far away. When the eyes first begin to see, everything seems blurred and whitish. Just as the sounds become more distinct, so does the sense of sight become clearer and clearer. There is a spot just out of coincidence in which, as the phantom passes upward through it, the consciousness seems to fade out to some extent, then radiate back to normal again. I have noticed this every time. Just as the astral body leaves the physical, the consciousness grows dim for an instant, then comes back again, like an electric bulb, growing dim for an interval, then again becoming bright. This spot is the place where it's most difficult to hold consciousness. And remember, it is very close to coincidence. It is in the zone of quietude. Producing an entirely conscious projection of the astral body is a very delicate and difficult feat, and usually one's attempt will be unsuccessful unless his physical body is in the most profound state of incapacity, and his emotions are absolutely calm. No subconscious stress is necessary in such a case, as the subconscious will takes the suggestion of moving upward directly from the conscious mind. The reason why completely conscious projections only occur, as a rule, after the subject has been sleeping for several hours, is because the physical body has become incapacitated to a greater extent. It is not unusual for people to awaken early in a condition of so-called nocturnal paralysis, which is really a cataleptic condition of the astral body, and this is the opportune time to try to project the astral body, which then becomes merely a matter of proper suggestion and emotional calm. I had noticed that completely conscious astral projections practically always occurred after I had been sleeping for several hours, sometimes even after I had slept for the entire night, often making their appearance at 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning. As a rule, I would suddenly become wide awake almost always at the same hour every morning for 6 or 8 mornings regularly, and then would come an even awakening at that identical time when I would experience the projection of the astral body. For about 6 mornings at 2 o'clock, I would suddenly awaken and, lying awake for about 15 minutes, would go back to sleep again. Then would come a morning when I would awaken at 2 o'clock and would have an astral projection, sometimes when emerging from sleep and sometimes on going to sleep again. The passive will. Have you ever had an intense desire to acquire or do something and found that you awakened regularly in the dead of night with this desire upon your mind and that you could think of nothing else? And have you ever noticed that after you had experienced this for some time, that what you desired you oftentimes acquired? When you stopped to think about this, did it not seem that some influence within you awakened you just for the purpose of allowing you to desire that which you wished? It has always appeared so to me, and I have on 3 different occasions acquired things which I very much wanted, and which in my hours of daily consciousness seemed absolutely beyond my reach. You will find if you analyze this that you will be able to conceive of doing or acquiring some of the most seemingly impossible things when you awaken in the dead of night and think about them. Things which you could never think of doing during your hours of daily thought. Take the following by way of example. Brown desires a rise in wages. He has had this desire for some time, but hesitates to ask his employer for more money. In the dead of night, Brown awakens with his mind upon more money. Perfectly conscious, he lies there and tells himself he will go to the boss and tell him what's what. He will do this and he will do that. But when the next day comes, where has the strong will, this determination disappeared? When Brown thinks of the resolutions he made when drowsy but conscious during the night before, he wonders how he possibly could have thought of doing such ridiculous things. Next night Brown awakens again, thinking of the same thing, more money. And while he lies there conscious but quiet and drowsy, he again has the strong will, which seems almost ridiculous during the day, and his intentions to tell the boss what's what and demand more money once more seem perfectly sane and reasonable. All of us have experienced this. We have thought up things, planned to do things, determined to acquire something while awake in the dead of night, and on the morrow have looked back upon those resolutions and almost too extreme, almost fantastic, almost carrying will too far. If we had the nerve in reality which we had in our nightly imagination, conscious imagination, wouldn't we be brave indeed? You have learned that will is putting into action, making ourselves do something mentally, centering our attention upon one thing until it crowds all other impressions into the background. There is a passive will and there is an active will, we will say. The passive will is the stronger, the more determined, and this is the will which we have when we awake in the dead of night and plan our air castles. We will call this the passive will because we are in a passive condition while we're using it when we are willing in the night, conscious but drowsy, passive. The will we will use during the day, which we are more or less compelled to use, we shall call the active will, because we are active in body and mind. The will we use during the day is the will which looks back upon the resolutions, the contemplations of the passive will the night before, and now thinks them too extreme. The passive will is the imaginative will, but is determined and extreme in its willing. Nevertheless, the subject is firmly convinced while the passive will is functioning that its premises are reasonable. Just another example now to show you the difference between the passive will and the active will, for all that is important in producing astral projection, as we shall presently see. I remember that when I was a small boy, my older brother had a 10-gauge shotgun. I had always wanted to be able to tell my friends that I had shot off that gun and how it backfired, etc. A boy next door one day told me that if I shot off the gun, the recoil would knock me over, and dared me to try it. I wanted to pretend that I was capable of handling a gun, but within me I was terribly afraid that if I did try to discharge it, I should get knocked over. Several nights I awakened thinking of shooting off that big gun, and as I lay thinking about it, I would resolve to do the deed. I could see myself doing it, see my friend next door looking on with envy, etc. To shoot off the 10-gauge gun seemed perfectly reasonable in the night when I thought of it, and many times I said I will shoot it off. But when the next day came and I looked at the gun, the resolutions of my passive will, my imaginative will, all my determination, which seemed so reasonable the night before, would seem preposterous and even fantastic. Now, if I but had the same determined will, the same extreme will, while active, which I had while passive, there would have been no hesitancy upon my part in discharging the gun. Of course, the active will and the passive will may be said to merge into one another, but for my present purpose we shall consider that there is a distinctly passive will and imaginative will, and that there is a distinctly active will, both conscious. You will understand, of course, that the passive will is by no means confined to manifesting itself during periods of wakefulness during the night, for the imaginative will can function at any time while we are conscious. The active will and the passive will can function simultaneously. That is, one can be performing an action dictated by the active will, and at the same time the passive will can be willing something else. Inducing projection by the passive will method. When we are daydreaming, we are often using the passive will. We can be imagining but not willing. We can will without being imaginative. But when we are imagining to extremes, when we awaken in the dead of night and think of performing some act, which during the day seemed preposterous, and that act seems at that time perfectly reasonable, when you say I will do this or I will do that to your imaginings, then you are putting super powerful impression into your subconscious mind. When you are serious in your suggestions as to what you will do, and when the act which you intend doing is extreme, the impression made upon the subconscious mind is proportionately powerful. Remember that the subconscious mind takes these suggestions seriously, regardless of the source whence they come, and hence, if you use your passive will upon that which you desire, the imaginative will, the extreme will, the determined will, the subconscious mind receives determined extreme suggestions which it could not possibly receive from the active will. Perhaps you will say, what are you trying to make us believe? That one can project merely by imagining that he can? In one sense, this is truer than you might think, but I am not advancing the claim that imagination alone can project the astral body. I am advancing the claim that passive will, the imaginative will, can cause the projection of the astral body. Since the subconscious mind accepts all suggestions without reasoning, the suggestions which it receives from the passive will, the extreme will, are accepted without reserve. Let us go back to that fellow Brown who wants more money from his employer. Under the influence of the passive will, as Brown lies awake in the dead of night thinking about his desire, he visualizes, imagines, sees himself going up to his employer and demanding higher wages. And all the time, under this imaginative will, Brown sees this as reasonable and even says, I will do this and I will do that, really in earnest for the time being. His subconscious mind is similarly influenced, and the stress of the extreme determination is powerful. Now, if Brown were to continue to use his extreme will, he would do the things he imagined that he would do. The subconscious mind, which received the suggestions, continues to hold them in that light. And if Brown's conscious mind were to exit for a time, the subconscious would still hold the stress of the passive willings. Now that is the principle under which you work to produce projection of the astral body, that is, awakening in the night under the passive will to project and going to sleep again with these extreme determined willings still centered in your mind. I have told you how I used to awaken at 2 o'clock every morning for many successive mornings, just before a conscious projection. Every time I awakened, it seemed to me that some power within me had purposely awakened me so that I would think about and desire the projection of the astral body. I would imagine seemingly impossible things concerning projection, and yet in that state of passivity they did not seem at all unattainable, and I often said, I will project, fully conscious from the start. I have done it unintentionally, and I can do it again. I will go to such and such a place, etc., allowing my imagination all the time to be accepted as perfectly reasonable. Yet by day I confessed that I would modify my will and think that I might project fully conscious from the start, that I might appear at such and such a place, and even though I had done so before, I doubted that I could intentionally do so again. Thus it eventually dawned upon me that the passive will, the imaginative will, was the stronger will after all, and that those serious and extreme imaginations which seemed reasonable at the time actually would take root in the subconscious mind just as forcibly as my passive will had impressed them upon it. It was thus that the first conscious astral projections were brought about. Although I had noticed the fact that I awakened about 2 o'clock morning after morning for many days prior to a conscious projection, and that during the waking period I would think of nothing but projection, the real cause of the completely conscious projection did not occur to me for several years. I now know that it was during these periods of nocturnal wakefulness that I was using the passive will, hyper-dynamizing the desire for projection which was already in my mind. Yes, the desire was already there, it was dynamized by my knowledge of and desire for projection, and the stress of the desire would awaken me in the night. And then I would be using the passive will upon the very stress which awakened me, thus hyper-dynamizing it, and later causing conscious projection from the beginning. And the completely conscious projection began at the hour at which I had been awakened each night. As a matter of fact, when the stress of a desire is strong enough to awaken you at night, it is strong enough to project you in the astral body without hyper-dynamizing it by the passive will. But to awaken each night successively and use the passive will upon the stress, the desire actually does hyper-dynamize that stress, and it will become so strong that you can then produce a projection conscious from the beginning. Sometimes when emerging from sleep, and sometimes when going to sleep again. The stress of the mind will do one of three things when it becomes strong. It will awaken the subject, it will cause him to somnambulate physically, or it will project the astral body. If the stress awakens you in the night, you can take advantage of this to use your passive will upon it, and thus make it stronger, more dynamic than ever, and some time or other a night will come when consciousness does not appear on time, and the subconscious will be in the act of moving the astral body when consciousness does appear. Perhaps it is just on the verge of moving the astral body, and perhaps the body is already projected some distance. I do not hesitate to declare that passive will to project, imaginative will to project the astral body is one of the big secrets of projecting. You can call it a process of mere imagination if you wish, but it's not mere imagination, but imagination plus will to do that which is imagined. You can never force the passive will successfully, for the instant you try to force passive will, it becomes active will. You must just have the desire to project so strongly within you that it produces passive will, which in turn builds up the stress of the desire and convinces the subconscious mind that the visions you imagine concerning projection are perfectly reasonable and possible. By day, perhaps under active will, you may think of projecting yourself, but will have your doubts as to whether you can do so. But by night, you can awaken and imagine yourself projecting, and have faith that you can do it, just as I had faith at night that I could discharge the shotgun, but had my doubts during the day when under active will. That determined, that extreme will which we have when awakening in the dead of night, conscious but drowsy, is the will which promotes the projection of the astral body. Use it to obtain results. Try to awaken at a certain hour, say at 3 o'clock every morning, and if your desire for projection be sufficiently strong, your imaginative will dwell upon that desire. Use no effort of will, just allow the will and the imagination concerned in projection to take their course and fall to sleep again during the process. Do this for several nights in succession, and soon strange things will begin to happen about this hour in the morning. The results produced by dynamization of projection. If you believe that you have your mind sufficiently dynamized with a desire to project, and if your belief is correct, one of the following things should occur. First, you should dream of a projection of the astral body. Second, you should somnambulate physically. One of the indications is to awaken and find yourself just getting out of bed. Third, you should awaken in the night with a desire upon your mind. Fourth, you should experience a conscious projection. If none of these manifestations occurs, there is but one explanation. Either you only imagine that your mind was dynamized with a desire, or else you're experiencing unconscious astral projections. And let me tell you this, unconscious astral projection is a common occurrence. I believe that no one has any idea of how really common unconscious astral projection is. It is my firm belief that for every case of physical somnambulism, there are a dozen astral projections of the unconscious type. I have experienced many conscious astral projections, and I have no idea how many times I have been unconsciously projected, yet I have, as far as I know, only experienced 2 or 3 physical somnambulisms in my life. As to the 4 different results which dynamization of the desire to project in the astral body should produce. First, should you dream of the projection of the astral body, at once try one of the methods for causing it to awaken when you reach a certain place. Second, if you somnambulate physically, you have not yet induced the proper degree of incapacity of the physical body, so you must reduce the heartbeat still more, and then when the subconscious will decides to project the body, the physical body will not respond instantly and will be left behind. Third, should you awaken in the dead of night with a desire in your mind, exert your passive will upon this desire, your imaginative will, and rise to sleep under the influence of this imaginative will. Also be sure that you induce complete bodily passivity before going to sleep, so that you may awaken in astral catalepsy. Fourth, should you find that none of the first 3 occurrences takes place, you have either a lack of desire, stress, or are undergoing unconscious projections. In this case, suggest to yourself on retiring that you will henceforth awaken at 3 o'clock every morning. If this does not awaken you, Use an alarm clock until you can form the habit of awakening at the proper time. Lie awake in the silence of the night, conscious but drowsy, and allow your passive will to work upon the desire to project. Continue this night after night until the habit of doing so is established. Then, on retiring at night, induce greater bodily passivity by slowing down the speed of the heart. This is one of the methods I tried with fair success, remaining conscious from the beginning. With my mind dynamized with the idea of projection, I would retire at night and reduce the heartbeat considerably before going to sleep. Often it would be beating about 30 pulsations per minute before sleep came on, and this would of course make it still slower when sleep did overtake me. Then I would awaken at a certain hour in the night, and if I did not find myself without my motivity, I would allow my passive will to take its course and could sometimes produce a projection upon entering sleep again. But if I did find that I was lacking in motivity, I would lie perfectly at ease and think only of moving upward into the room and away. As a rule, the astral body will be found to separate from the physical before the subject awakens, as it did in my case many times when trying this method, aside from the conscious from the beginning cases. There is still another method which I have found to be good, very good in fact, and probably the most pleasant experience I ever had was obtained by this method. My mind being dynamized with the desire to project, I would awake at 2 o'clock in the morning, and while lying awake, conscious but drowsy, I would think of projecting and of waking in the room of one of my friends, some distance from my home. I would lie there passive, my imaginative will working upon this desire, and finally go to sleep with this in mind, and it worked. I had only repeated this process about 1 week when I awoke in her, my friend's room, instead of in my physical body. She was at the time asleep, and after standing there watching her for a while, I departed. You may say, why didn't you try to awaken her while you were there? But in turn, I would ask you this: what good would it have done to try the same old experiment of making contact with things physical? I have tried that so many times without success that in my mind it seems but a waste of time, when there are so many other things to see and experience while one has the chance to do so. I had often told my friend about projection of the astral body and explained it to her, but although she would listen, she always had her doubts. After I discovered this relatively easy method of projecting the astral body to her side, I hit upon a plan which I hoped would get results and convince her that I really could project my astral body. I wanted very much to convince her and cared not whether anyone else believed me or not. Some typical projections. So we agreed upon this plan. Both of us were to awaken at 2 o'clock and lie awake, conscious but drowsy. I was to think of projecting myself into her room. She was to visualize my doing so. I hoped by this method to use not only my own powers of projection, but also to utilize her psychic force to assist me. We were to allow our passive wills to work upon our desires in the dead of night at the same time. Several weeks passed, and during this time I succeeded in projecting myself into her room several times and becoming conscious when there. But I had no recollection of having traveled the intervening distance. In other words, I remained unconscious until the time when I awakened. On one occasion I awakened. She was awake too, but did not see me. A queer thing did happen, however. I decided on the next occasion to do certain things which I would not tell her, and see if she could describe to me what I did, provided she admitted seeing me. I accordingly went over to her dresser, put my hand upon her hairbrush, walked over to her and put my hand upon her shoulder, stood there for a few moments, then went back and placed my hand upon the hairbrush, then back to her again, etc., repeating this about a dozen times. All the time she was apparently sleeping. The next day I inquired if she had seen me in her room. No, was the reply, but I dreamt that you were there. What did you dream? I asked her. I dreamt that you were trying to brush my hair, she replied, and that you kept running back and forth trying to find the comb, and that I kept telling you it was on the dresser. I concluded that this was very nearly a complete success, even though she were but dreaming. However, attempts on her part to see me seemed to be unsuccessful. And then, what do you suppose happened? I had a dream of being in her room, evidently a partially conscious projection, as I did not recall having had the dream until the next day when I met her, and she stated that she had seen me there. Nothing would convince her that she had not seen me. Of course, the theory of thought forms might be advanced to account for this, but then it is no greater miracle for the astral body to be at a spot than for a thought form to be created and seen. If the astral phantom can project by night and influence the thoughts of others at a distance, is it not possible that many persons may have committed crimes as the result of some criminal phantom hovering near them while they slept and influencing their minds to commit a crime? It is certainly possible. The idea that dreams are all caused by events met with in prior states of conscious everyday life, which are recorded in the subconscious mind, is pure fallacy. Phantoms of the dead and of the living, thoughts of the dead and of the living, can bring about dreams and also influence the minds of individuals, the latter being quite unaware of the fact. And here is another point. Suppose one should project in his astral body by night and enter a house belonging to someone else, and that someone residing in that house should see the phantom. Do you suppose that you could induce the ordinary individual to believe that the phantom thus projected was that of an earthly living person like himself, who was but sleeping somewhere? Hardly. And if the projected phantom were unconscious, the seer would say that the spirit he saw walked right past him without paying any attention to his being there. Thus, there are many ways of accounting for haunted house phenomena, and further, if the projected phantom were unconscious, why might it not be influenced by the thoughts of those residing in the house and do the things which these individuals conceived it doing? Might not telepathy exercise a control over the phantom's mind? I think it highly probable. For example, while I was dreaming of being in my friend's room, at the time she thought she saw me there, might not her mind have instigated the dream which I had of being there in my mind? In any case, that is what happened on that occasion, and she stated that I came into the room through the wall just as she was about to go to sleep, and that I paid no attention to her as I walked about the room, finally passing out through the wall again. As time passed, with the cares and duties of everyday existence, our experimenting dropped into insignificance, but since then I have awakened several times in her room by using the passive will, the imaginative will to do so, and at other times during unintentional projections. Why not try this experiment, therefore, if there are no reasons why you cannot try it? Arrange with someone of whom you are fond and who in turn is affectionately disposed toward you. Both should awaken at a given hour in the night, and lying awake, conscious but drowsy, allow your conscious passive wills to operate upon the desire. The one who is to project must desire to be at the side of the seer, must visualize himself moving upward, out of the physical, and speeding through the air to the seer's side. And the seer must imagine the projector doing so at the same time. But do not forget to use your passive will, your imaginative will. Go to sleep using the passive will. The greater the affection which exists between the projector and seer, the greater the harmony and the greater will be the desire. And as a mere experiment someday, when you're away from someone you love, on going to bed at night, use your imaginative will and desire to come back to him or her, visualizing yourself moving upward out of the physical body just as you're entering sleep. Another factor which will aid in this experiment is that the astral body usually is under the inclination to move back to the place where it's in the habit of residing, and also moves with much more ease from a strange place to a familiar place. I have taken the following accounts, which are similar to those which I have just given from Carrington's True Ghost Stories. Here, in a case of this nature, experienced by the English investigator, the Reverend William Stainton Moses, who corroborates the following account, which is furnished by the agent. One evening I resolved to appear to Z at some miles distance. I had not informed him beforehand of the intended experiment, but retired to rest shortly after midnight, my thoughts intently fixed upon Z, with whose rooms and surroundings I was quite unacquainted. I soon fell asleep and woke next morning unconscious of anything having taken place. On seeing Z a few days later, I inquired, "Did anything happen at your rooms on Saturday night?" "Yes," he replied, "a great deal happened. I had been sitting over the fire with M smoking and chatting. About 12:30 he arose to leave, and I let him out myself. I turned to the fire to finish my pipe when I saw you sitting in the chair just vacated by him. I looked intently at you and then took up a newspaper to assure myself that I was not dreaming. But on laying it down, again I saw you still there. While I gazed without speaking, you faded away." Some occultists would contend that the foregoing case might readily be accounted for as a thought form, that is, that the will of the person who determined to appear was so powerful that it created his form at the place. But as for me, I have undergone too many of these experiences while conscious ever to accept the thought form theory, although I admit its possibility. Just why experimenters should try to discard one seeming miracle by substituting another is beyond me. Is the astral body theory more difficult to accept than the thought form theory? Here is a typical unconscious astral projection. Another explanation advanced is that by means of telepathy, a person might impress his thoughts upon the mind of another in some distant place so strongly that the latter would have a telepathic hallucination and believe that he saw the agent there. I shall discuss how the mind can create thought forms later. In the case which follows, the initials only are used, but the writer of the account was known to the officers of the SPR, who vouched for the general trustworthiness of the writer. On a certain Sunday evening in November 1881, having been reading of the great power which the human will is capable of exercising, I determined with the whole force of my being that I would be present in spirit in the front bedroom of the second floor of a house situated at 22 Hogarth Road, Kingston, in which room slept two young ladies of my acquaintance, namely Miss L.S.V. and Miss E.C.V., aged respectively 25 and 11 years. I was living at the time at 23 Kildare Gardens, a distance of about 3 miles from Hogarth Road, and I had not mentioned in any way my intention of trying this experiment to either of the above ladies, for the simple reason that it was only on retiring to rest upon this Sunday night that I made up my mind to do so. The time at which I determined to be there was 1 o'clock in the morning, and I had a strong intention of making my presence perceptible. On the following Thursday I went to see the ladies in question, and in the course of my conversation, without any allusion to the subject on my part, the elder one told me that on the previous Sunday night she had been much terrified by perceiving me standing by her bedside, and that she screamed when the apparition advanced toward her and awoke her little sister, who also saw me. I asked her if she was awake at the time, and she replied most decidedly in the affirmative, and upon my inquiring the time of the occurrence, she replied about 1 o'clock in the morning. This lady, at my request, wrote down a statement of the event and signed it. Mr. Gurney, one of the authors of Phantasms of the Living, became deeply interested in these experiments and requested Mr. B. to notify him in advance on the next occasion when he proposed to make his presence known in this strange manner. Accordingly, March 22nd, 1884, he received the following letter. Dear Mr. Gurney, I am going to try the experiment tonight of making my presence perceptible at 44 Moreland Square at 12 p.m. I will let you know the result in a few days. Yours very sincerely, S.H.B. The next letter, which was written on April 3rd, contained the following statement prepared by the recipient, Miss L.S. Verity. On Saturday night, March 22nd, 1884, at about midnight, I had a distinct impression that Mr. SHB was present in my room, and I distinctly saw him being quite awake. He came toward me and stroked my hair. I voluntarily gave him this information when he called to see me on Wednesday, April 2nd, telling him the time and the circumstances of the apparition without any suggestion on his part. The appearance in my room was most vivid and quite unmistakable. Miss A.S. Verity also furnishes the corroborative statement. I remember my sister telling me that she had seen SHB and that he touched her hair before he came to see us on April 2nd. The HN statement of the affair is as follows. On Saturday, March 22nd, I determined to make my presence perceptible to Miss V at 44 Moreland Square, Notting Hill at 12 midnight, and as I had previously arranged with Mr. Gurney that I should post him a letter of the evening on which I tried my next experiment, stating the time and other particulars, I sent him a note to acquaint him with the above facts. About 10 days afterward, I called upon Miss V, and she voluntarily told me that on March 22nd at 12 o'clock midnight, she had seen me so vividly in her room whilst wide awake, and that her nerves had been much shaken, and she had been obliged to send for a doctor in the morning. Experiences such as these might be passed off as telepathic hallucinations, but to my way of thinking, each example given is a typical unconscious projection of the astral body. Do you know how long it takes the astral body to speed to a distant place and come back again into the zone of quietude while the subject sleeps? Just about 1/1000th of the time which it takes you to think about it. When a projected phantom is conscious at some place at a distance, how is such an event to be explained? By the telepathic hallucination theory or by the astral body theory? The